Good morning. Welcome to the County of Placer Board of Supervisors meeting for Thursday, October 11, 2012. We begin today at 10:31 a.m. We will start with flag salute led by our County Council, Jerry Carden.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Jerry. Before we move into the rest of the agenda, I'd like to mention that we actually cannot have people standing along the walls by our fire code. We have additional seating in conference room A, which is just right out this door and to the right. There is a television there, so you can watch the proceedings. And if you've chosen to speak, there's also chairs there, so you won't have to stand. You can watch the proceedings from there, and if you want, you can sort of monitor if you're a commenter when you're going to be able to come up and comment. There are additionally chairs in the front hall, also with a television. And then if you just are happy with audio, out in the courtyard, we do have additional seating with audio. But I would ask that everyone please not stand along the hall, the walls. Thank you. Sorry about that. All right. We will begin then with our statement of meeting procedures read by our clerk of the board, Ann Holman.
Welcome to the Placer County Board of Supervisors meeting of Thursday, October 11th, 2012. Agendas are available on the wall outside this meeting room. If you are here to speak on an issue not appearing on the agenda, you may do so during the public comment period. There's a 3-minute time limit per speaker. The board is not permitted to take action on items addressed under public comment. When you speak, clearly state your name and address for the record. All items on the agenda will be open for the public to address before final action is taken. There's a 3-minute time limit per speaker, which will be monitored by a timer on the podium. If there is a person speaking on behalf of a group with no other testimony from another member of the group, please identify yourself as such, and your time may be extended at the pleasure of the board. Keep in mind that the chairman has discretion of limiting the total discussion time on any item. If you are hearing impaired, we have listening devices available. It is requested that all pagers and cell phones be either turned off or put in the silent mode. Thank you for your participation and cooperation.
Thank you, Ann. Now is the time for public comment, and let me just be really clear on this. This is public comment aside from anything that is on today's agenda. People often show up and just want to bring something to our attention. So this is the time that persons may address the board on any item not on today's agenda. So not the orchard. There will be time for that moving forward. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes, since the time allocated is 15 minutes. And if all comments cannot be heard in that 15 minutes, we will reopen public comment at the end of the meeting and finish it up then. So also understand that the board is not permitted to take any action on public comment today under the public comment section. So if there's anyone who has anything to say that is not related to today's agenda item, now is your opportunity to come forward. That's what I figured. So I am I'm going to close public comment at this point and bring it to the supervisors to see if there are any supervisor committee reports. All right, seeing none, we will move to our 10:30 timed item. What I would like to do, just to sort of bring people into how this process works, because I'm sure a number of you have probably never attended a Board of Supervisors meeting before. How this process works, just so we all have an understanding of where we're going, is we will start with a staff report from county staff. Then each of the appellants will be given 15 minutes to present their appeal. Then the applicant will be given 15 minutes to present their project. Once that happens, it will come back to the board. I will ask the board if there are any clarifications or questions that the board has of any of those individuals, staff, appellant, or applicants. Once the board has moved through that process, we will then open it up to a public hearing. And any of you who wish to speak, I know there was a sign-up sheet. If you have not signed up, Ann, where would people go to sign up if they have not? Okay, directly out in front of the building, if you did want to speak and you've not put your name on the list, directly out in front of the building, you can add your name to that list. That's when we will start public testimony. Any individual is entitled to 3 minutes. If you're representing a group, you will get 5 minutes. We will hear public testimony until you are done giving that testimony. At that point, it will come back here to the Board of Supes. We will be taking closing comments and corrections. This is not a rebuttal, but it's comments and corrections to anything that may have been raised in the process to that time from staff, then from each of the appellants, and then from the applicant. At that time, I will actually close the public hearing, which means all public comment is shut off at that point. We will bring it back to the board for deliberation, and we will then proceed to take 2 actions, one on each of the appeals in front of us today. So that's going to be the process on the appeals, and depending on the outcome of those votes on the appeals, we may or may not move forward to the other agendized items, which would be, we're being asked to certify the environmental impact report, and we're being asked to uphold the action of the Planning Commission. But that is dependent upon what happens on those first 2 votes. Everybody clear on that? Pretty straightforward? Okay, great. I just really wanted people to understand what this process is going to be. The one last piece of information I have is we are working under some time constraints today. We actually have another meeting scheduled in this room at 2:30 that we can't cancel. So we're hoping that people will be brief and succinct in their comments, and if you are, say, in support of the Stop 150 Apartments appeal, stand up, identify yourself, say, I'm Jennifer Montgomery and I agree with the proponent, the appellant, the staff recommendation, whatever. So if we can just try to operate a little bit under those guidelines, we should be able to move through this, hearing everyone, giving people the respect they deserve, and coming to an outcome today. So thank you all very much, and at this time, we will start with the staff report.
Madam Chair, I have a question, just
Yes,
a point of clarification, and this is just a procedural matter, and this is for legal counsel. This hearing or appeal is a de novo review, correct? It's brand new. We don't have to find anything wrong with the Planning Commission's decision. This is just as if
Yes,
it was presented to us for the first time.
Yeah, the project for you is a de
Okay.
novo review.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Supervisor Duran. Any other quick questions or comments from the board's clarifications before we go to staff? Okay, thank you. EJ.
I'm E.J. Valdi with the Planning and Service Division. I'm joined here with Michael Johnson, the agency director, along with our county staff and the EIR consultant as well. So what I want to do, we're here to consider the 2 appeals that were filed in response to the Planning Commission's approval of the orchard at Penryn project, one by the Town of Loomis and the other by the Stop 150 Apartments group. I'll start off by giving you an overview of the project and the public review process, and then I'll focus on the issues of appeal.
If your clicker works.
Dun, dun, dun. And I could be hitting the wrong button, but I don't think so.
Greg, do we have a backup? He's on his way. Excellent. Thank you. Bear with us. Oh, there we go.
I like that.
Wonderful.
So up on the screen is a vicinity map. The orchard Penryn project site is comprised of 2 parcels totaling 15.1 acres, located on the west side of Penryn Road, about a half-mile north of Interstate 80. The northwest corner of the project site is located adjacent to Taylor Road, which is up in this area. There are large lot rural residential land uses to the north and west of the project site. There we go. I think my thing works now. And then up to the north is Penryn Country Estates, which is a 15-lot, large lot subdivision that actually goes across Taylor Road as well. To the south is Hope Lutheran Church, and over to the east of the project site is Dave's Hay Barn. There's a nursery, and then some commercial properties developed with single-family residences. The site plan shows 150 multifamily residential units that would be clustered into 4 architecturally distinct villages, separated by a single access road that runs east to west through the property. I'll get this figured out by the time I get halfway through this. So here the road is that goes through, and then each one of these is a separate village with its own architectural theme in the project. The multifamily residential complex would consist of 3 and 6 unit buildings with individual units ranging in area between 1,150 square feet and 1,400 square feet. These units are proposed as a rental community and could also be developed as residential condominiums under the requested entitlements. On-site recreational facilities proposed would include an approximately 3,900 square foot recreation center, an outdoor pool and spa, and a tot lot. Up on the screen is a landscape plan which kind of better depicts what's going on the site. There are passive recreation areas located throughout the project, including a number of open turf areas. There's a large, commonly held natural drainage area that bisects the property north to south, right in this area. That would remain and be preserved. There's also several prominent rock outcroppings throughout the project that would be preserved. There would be a 30-foot landscape easement provided along the site's Penryn Road frontage, right along in here, which is a requirement of the Horseshoe Bar Penryn Community Plan. There would also be extensive landscaping around the perimeter of the site, including a 6-foot high open wrought iron fence. So primary access to the site is proposed through a gated entrance off of Penryn Road, in the large circle area there. A secondary exit-only gated access point is proposed for Taylor Road. There would be off-street parking provided for a total of 375 vehicles, 250 of those which would be garage spaces, and this is consistent with the zoning ordinance requirements. Penryn Road itself is proposed to be widened to provide pavement width for 2 southbound 12-foot travel lanes, a Class 2 bike lane, and curb, gutter, and sidewalk. A bus turnout is also required as a condition of approval. The project would also be required to provide pavement width for 1/2 of a center 2-way left turn lane along Penryn Road. So what's proposed, there's a rendering of one of the units. I believe this is a 6-plex unit. They would be a maximum of 2 stories. Each of the 4 villages would have unique architectural elements and color schemes incorporated into the building design, emphasizing the Gold Rush era architecture. And what that includes is earth tone colors to blend in with the natural environment, decorative shutters, wood corbels, and trim. There would be a combination of stucco and horizontal fiber cement siding, and then architectural asphalt shingles. The actual final building design, and there's another rendering of what one of the triplex will look like, would be subject to the county's design review process to ensure consistency with the Penryn Parkway development policies. And there's a floor plan showing the triplex, and the 6-plex is basically the same 2 floor plans mirrored together. This is an exhibit of the recreation building. It's 3,900 square feet. It would include a leasing office, indoor fitness center, and an internet cafe. Building architecture would be compatible with the proposed residential buildings. So I want to tell you a little bit about the public review process. This project has gone through an extensive public review process over the last 5 years. First being discussed at the Penryn Community Forum in 2007, something that Supervisor Holmes put on. There was an EIR public scoping meeting in April 2010, and a Planning Commission hearing in August 2011 where comments were accepted on the draft EIR. Updates of the Orchard at Penryn project were also provided to the Penryn Municipal Advisory Council on at least 6 occasions, including a meeting in January of this year where the MAC voted 5-0 to recommend denial of the project to the Planning Commission. At the Planning Commission hearing on June 28th, after listening to substantial testimony, the Planning Commission certified the EIR and approved the vesting tentative subdivision map and conditional use permit to allow the Orchard at Penryn project. Within the 10-day appeal period, 2 separate third-party appeals of the Planning Commission's approval of the project were filed with the county. The first on June 29th by Rick Angelosi on behalf of the Town of Loomis, and the second on July 9th by Bobby Apal on behalf of the Stop 150 Apartments group. Staff has provided formal written responses to each issue raised by the Town of Loomis and the Stop 150 Apartment group. These responses are included as an attachment in your board packet. Staff has also prepared an errata to the EIR, further clarifying the analysis on points raised by the appellants. So one of the underlying issues raised by both appellants is the project's consistency with the Horseshoe Bar Penryn Community Plan that included Penryn Parkway and the underlying zone districts. The Horseshoe Bar Penryn Community Plan area encompasses 25 square miles. Within this community plan area is the Penryn Parkway. The Penryn Parkway was established in 1988 as part of the Loomis Basin General Plan and affirmed with adoption of the 1994 Horseshoe Bar Penryn Community Plan when the board adopted it. The Penryn Parkway is generally located along Penryn Road between Interstate 80 and Taylor Road and comprises 166 acres, or about 1% of the total plan area. The intent behind the Penryn Parkway designation was to designate a concise, identifiable area that would encourage a compact commercial core to serve the overall Penryn area, thereby eliminating the need for scattered commercial sites within the outlying rural areas of Penryn. In essence, this area was established to preserve the rural character of the vast majority of the plan area. The Penryn Parkway is a separate and distinct community land use, community plan land use. The plan also has separate land use designations for low, medium, and high-density residential uses, but these land use designations have no relevance for purposes of determining the permissible land uses within the Penryn Parkway designation. Policy E in the community plan states that the Penryn Parkway is intended as a highway service-oriented retail area which also allows for multiple family residential uses. Because the Penryn Parkway does not specify an allowable density or establish minimum or maximum lot sizes, the allowed density is determined by the underlying zoning. Let's show a zoning map up on the screen right now, and it shows that the property has two zonings. 9.9 acres is zoned RMDL10. This is a residential multifamily zoning with a density limitation of 10 units per acre. This designation allows for a maximum of 10 multiple family residential units per acre with approval of a minor use permit. On that western half, that would mean the potential would be for 99 units. The 5.2 acres adjacent to Penryn Road is zoned C1 UPDC. That is a neighborhood commercial zoning with a combining use permit requirement. This designation allows for one multiple family residential unit per 2,000 square feet, or approximately 20 units per acre, 21 units per acre. That calculates out to the possibility of 113 residential units on that eastern half. Collectively, the current zoning on the two parcels could potentially allow for up to 212 multifamily residential units. So it is important to note the maximum 10 unit per acre zoning has been in place on this property since 1981 when the properties were rezoned from agricultural residential with a 4.6 acre minimum. This same 10 unit per acre zoning was affirmed when the Penryn Parkway was established as part of the Loomis Basin General Plan in 1988, and then reaffirmed with the adoption of the Horseshoe Bar Penryn Community Plan and its adoption in 1994. So here's an exhibit showing the Penryn Parkway, and what this shows is existing and approved development within the parkway as it is today. You have the Penryn Country Estates up in the northern part of this area. You have Dave's Hay Barn, the nursery, Penryn Townhomes, which is not developed. It is an approved project, though. You have the Penryn Outlets, 76 Station, and everybody's familiar with Penryn Park, which is now known as the Orchards. Then you have the office use, the Penryn Plaza, down below. So as we flip through these slides, you see the change that is going on. This actually shows the properties that have been developed with single-family residences that have, I guess we can consider them to be underutilized, and they could potentially be developed in the future with more intense uses. And as we take those properties away, we have this slide that shows the undeveloped parcels remaining within the Penryn Parkway that total about 34 acres. This is roughly 20% of the plan area, and the areas in kind of the light blue are the vacant properties that could potentially be developed, including the orchard at Penryn site. Yes?
Again, the 34 acres includes the 15 acres of orchard?
The 34 acres does not
Does
include
not.
that.
Okay.
And so that 20% number I gave you, if we added in the orchard at Penryn project, about 30% of the plan area remains undeveloped.
Thank you.
Madam Chair. EJ, 30% of the Penryn Parkway plan area, is that what you're saying? Or-
Yes, everything within, oh, I didn't want to do that.
Okay,
Everything within this, this border.
okay.
Okay. So I'll get into the more detailed specific issues with the issues of appeal from the two appellants. As far as this is the Town of Loomis, kind of a summary of their issues of appeal. Like I said, staff has provided a formal written response to each issue raised by the Town of Loomis in a separate letter that's included as part of your board packet. Staff believes that all of the town's comments on the draft EIR have been adequately responded to, and I'm just going to kind of run through these. In response to the water issue, Placer County Water Agency has confirmed that water would be made available to the site, and the urban water management plan shows that there is adequate water now and in the future to serve the demand generated by the project. Access to public transportation is being provided with a proposed bus stop at the project entrance along Penryn Road. Staff believes that the draft EIR has demonstrated adequate site distance at the Taylor Road exit, and with no grade difference at the driveway locations, any potential safety hazards would be minimized. Student generation rates, these were taken from the school districts that dictate the Orchard Penryn project would generate up to 51 elementary and middle school students and up to 35 Del Oro High School students. This impact is considered less significant with the required payment of school facility fees. The Planning Commission concluded that trip generation rates used in the traffic impact analysis are adequate, even when considering the student generation rates used by the Placer Union High School District. The conclusion is the same in that Del Oro High School likely experiences peak hour congestion primarily due to the peaky nature of high school traffic.
EJ, I believe Supervisor Holmes has a question.
Getting back to student generation
Yes.
rates, there's been no comment from the school districts regarding this project that they may be able to serve the students that it's proposed to.
Yeah, and that's correct. We haven't heard anything from the school district that they would not be able to accommodate the students generated at this project.
And while we're interrupting, I did have a quick question. On number 3, access to public transportation, you indicate that there's a bus stop proposed and then there's a bus pullout on Taylor. Is that correct? Are there two separate stops or just one?
No, on Penryn Road.
On Penryn.
I'm not aware of anyone on Taylor, not to my knowledge.
And
but on Penryn Road.
is there bus service out there currently?
Well, there's no bus stop there, so.
No, but I mean, is there a bus that drives by
Drives
there that
through
would
Penryn
stop?
Road there, maybe? No? No, the answer is no.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Supervisor Duran?
Yeah, EJ, getting back to the 51 elementary school students and the 35 high school students, wouldn't Del Oro High School and the elementary school be getting additional ADA money for every student?
I'm not sure about that. Is that true, Michael?
They would, okay. And I was on the Roseville Joint Union High School District, and our ADA went down from, I believe, 11,000 to 6,500. Doing my math here, that's 331,500 for the elementary school district and $227,500 per year for the high school district. Are you familiar with those numbers? Yeah. Okay, thank you.
And I'll add on to that, I had discussions with school officials as well, and I think you can count on about $5,000 per child in a seat at
Okay.
the school districts. And it's been a phenomenon, as you know, you were on a school board, that we're seeing declining enrollment throughout Northern California. Not only, I saw it in Auburn. We had to close a school in Auburn because there was declining enrollment. And so as the enrollment declines, and that puts a burden on your schools, so.
Yeah, in the Roseville Joint Union High School District, we actually passed a resolution where we didn't allow transfers. We would allow kids to come into the district, of course, because we wanted the money, but to transfer out, there had to be a pretty high bar, and that was specifically because of the
We had that
ADA.
discussion in Auburn as well.
Thank you.
And EJ, I'm sorry, before we leave number 5, student generation rates in the traffic study, it was 51 at the middle school,
Correct. Elementary and middle school.
elementary and middle, and 35 at the high school.
That's correct.
9 trips generated at the high school, and how many for the elementary and middle?
I don't know if we had that number, and I'm not even sure if that number was originally part of the traffic study, and that was part of the question. I'm not know if I'm the better versed person to talk about that, those numbers, but there is an explanation for the difference, and it basically was based on the different analysis that were done.
Okay. Michael, if at some point I could find out what those actual trip numbers were, that would be really useful to my understanding of the discussion. Thank you. EJ, please continue.
Okay. So in regards to mitigation for traffic impacts, the Town of Loomis asserts that the county failed to identify and adopt mitigation measures that would reduce traffic impacts to a less than significant level and failed to consider alternative mitigation measures as a means to reduce traffic impacts. The county has, in fact, included mitigation that requires the applicant to cooperate in good faith with the town in trying to carry out the recommended mitigation by paying its fair share of recommended intersection improvements. However, because the improvements are within the town's jurisdiction, the county cannot guarantee that identified impacts would be constructed. Just recently, the Town of Loomis passed a resolution that could potentially direct fair share portions of traffic fees related to traffic impacts on roads within Loomis's jurisdiction to be placed in Loomis accounts encumbered to perform the mitigation measures for such identified impacts. And that resolution is attached to your board packet. Unfortunately, this resolution does not provide the county with the assurance that the town has established a mitigation program, including a fee structure to ascertain the cost of the improvements and ensure that the improvements will actually be constructed, thereby mitigating the traffic impact to a less than significant level.
EJ, just to clarify, so hypothetically, if the county were to give the Town of Loomis money specifically for this use, there's no guarantee that it would be used or could be used for that purpose.
Right, no guarantee what improvements that would be used, if it would be used at all, or where it would go. And
the MOU is the purpose of that assurance to the county, correct?
Yeah, and I know there's discussion about an MOU now. Ken Graham with our Public Works Department probably knows more about that. But right now, all that I am aware of is the resolution that was passed, falling short of any type of MOU.
Okay, thank you.
To follow up on Supervisor Duran's question, an MOU could, however, address that concern.
I
Potentially.
believe so.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
So moving on to the Stop 150 Apartments group, contrary to their letter of appeal and support letter from Keith Wagner, the Planning Commission did make the finding that the proposed project is consistent with a broad range of general community plan goals and policies contained in the Horseshoe Bar Penryn Community Plan, specifically those aimed at protecting natural resources, minimizing grading impacts for roadways, protecting water quality, and maintaining the natural view corridors. Additionally, the Planning Commission found that the project is consistent with both the Penryn Parkway land use designation and Penryn Parkway development policies. The term relatively low density in the policy D of the plan is not the same as the low density plan land use designation as the applicant has asserted. The above term seeks to implement the intent of the Penryn Parkway development policy and necessity of a conscientious design review regarding the location and appearance of buildings, parking, signs, and landscaping necessary to ensure the integration of commercial uses and compatibility with surrounding rural residential uses. Moving on to the next issue, the county has provided clarification on sewer capacity in the final errata to the EIR. South Placer Municipal Utility District, known as SB MUD, has verified that the sewer study completed is adequate, and the existing SP MUD sewer trunk line has adequate capacity to accommodate anticipated sewer flows generated by the project. Regards to noise, the county...
Excuse me, Jay.
Yes.
On that particular point, there was a comment made that either the trunk line had some sediment in there, and that the calculation may be not as clear as it could have been. Has that trunk line been cleaned?
It actually has. As part of their maintenance program, they're required to go in there and clean the sediment to make sure there's adequate flows, and they actually did that just recently, and that's just part of the regular maintenance.
And the concern there was the flows in the event of a water or storm event, correct?
Right, and there wouldn't be enough capacity. But in fact, those lines are routinely cleaned, so there is adequate flow. And SP MUD provided assurance that that was the case. And I believe we also addressed that in the EIR errata, just further clarifying that. Speaking to noise, the county code exempts noises generated from construction activities during daytime hours from the county noise standards, which that was challenged as part of the appeal. There are projects conditions of approval that further control the times at which noises can be generated, ensure that construction noise is not excessive. They identify performance standards applicable to any blasting activities and prohibit construction traffic on Taylor Road. Lastly, the county maintains that the cumulative analysis in the draft EIR did define the geographic scope covered by the EIR's cumulative impact analysis and did disclose all known, approved, active, or reasonably foreseeable projects by which cumulative impacts would influence impacts of the Orchard at Penryn project under existing or cumulative conditions. So just kind of as a wrap-up, in conclusion, staff could not find any merit in the appeal issues raised by either appellant. The majority of issues raised are the same issues that were considered by the Planning Commission at its June 28th hearing. At that hearing, the Planning Commission found that the project's EIR is complete, adequate, and in full compliance with CEQA. The project is consistent with the Horseshoe Bar Penryn community plan. The proposed density with 150 multifamily residential units is consistent with the land use diagram and underlying zone districts. And the project's design itself is consistent with the Penryn Parkway development policies. So with that, staff is asking that the board take the following actions, and I'm just going to run through these for you. These are all separate actions. The first is to deny the third-party appeal filed by Rick Angelosi on behalf of the Town of Loomis. Second action would deny the third-party appeal filed by Bobby Apal on behalf of the Stop 150 Apartments Group. We'd ask that you certify the environmental impact report and the final errata that was prepared for the project and approve the mitigation monitoring and reporting program. And then also uphold the action of the Planning Commission and approve the vesting tentative subdivision map and conditional use permit to allow for the construction of the Orchard at Penryn project.
And EJ, if I just may interrupt briefly, on number 3, just to clarify, part of certifying the environmental impact report would be a requirement that we made the findings of overriding consideration
Absolutely.
in the project. Okay,
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Getting back to your comment with regards to all known projects, I believe there was something raised about the Clover Valley project and why it wasn't included in the EIR. What was that resolved in the errata?
It was resolved in the errata, and it was found to be outside the geographic scope of the project. And it's probably get more detailed into that question if you want to, but there's a pretty lengthy response in the appeal letter.
Yeah, and it wasn't a similar project. It was outside of that scope, but
Right, generally outside of that, the general geographic area that we had defined as part of that.
Thank you.
Supervisor Holmes?
Getting back to the noise issue during construction, any project that has a construction project has to comply with county code as far as noise during construction. And so that would be applied to this project as well.
Absolutely.
EJ, before we move off you to the first appellant, I did want to probably, I don't know if we need to go back to slide 3, but I noticed that in slide 3, there was one 100-year floodplain that was shown further into some of our documents. There is a second 100-year floodplain that's indicated on some of the other maps. And historically, this board has not approved development within 100-year floodplains. I mean, I'm sure a number of projects that this board can remember where we've said, no, you've got to move that. How or why is this different? If slide 29 actually shows, or slide 30, there's a number of slides farther along.
Maybe our communication folks could jump to slide 29 faster than I can get to it.
That's where I'd rather be.
That's a 100-year floodplain
Close.
for sure. Yeah. And the most scenic floodplain in the world.
EJ, while we're waiting, can I ask a question, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, we're there. So just on this map, this shows both of the existing mapped 100-year floodplains. And in the past, we as a board have said, on Riola Vineyards, on Homewood Mountain Resort, some other projects, we've said, no, you can't build in the 100-year floodplain. As a county policy, you've got to take those buildings out of there. Why or how is this different?
And on this, this is actually a reduced density alternative, so this isn't the actual site plan of the project.
Right, it was just one of the few that showed both floodplains.
I believe we are staying out of the floodplain within this central drainage area. A lot of this other area, as you know, there were a lot of toxics on this site, and the applicant had to work with DTSC as far as cleanup. A large majority of soil on site has to be removed, and that includes areas within the floodplain over here, so that area is already going to be impacted with the development of that.
At the same time, it's standard county practice when such an occurrence happens. The desire is to reroute the drainage waters out into the public right-of-way, and so because the site has to be, the soil needs to be removed from the site, it provides an opportunity to take the drainage patterns and put it out in the drainage system in the Penryn Road right-of-way.
I guess my question is, what does that actually do to the designation of it as a 100-year floodplain? I mean, does FEMA suddenly, or whoever designates floodplains, look at it and say, oh, it's no longer a floodplain because you did soil remediation and made some changes?
The county would apply to FEMA to modify the floodplain in that location based upon the new information available.
Yeah, but just based on what I was presented, I don't believe these are FEMA floodplains. They're more, would we say they're floodways, local floodways, not a FEMA-designated floodplain.
Okay, but moving this project forward, if I'm understanding what you're telling me, and I just want to be really clear on this, because this 100-year floodplain has been a fairly important issue to all of us on the board in the past. The project development itself, through the DTSC cleanup and remediation, would actually do away with that floodplain by redirecting it?
Well, it would impact that area because they would have to disturb it, clean the soil. So with that, they're going to disrupt that floodplain. So as a result of the project being developed, then that I believe that gets piped down on the eastern section of the project, while the central part will continue to run through.
Okay, so my concern again, and it just relates to floodplains generally, not specific to this project proposal, is so we go through and we do whatever is necessary, we being the project proponent, to take care of the issue on this site. What happens to the neighbors immediately north and south of this?
Well, as far as I know, the flow still continues to go through the property. It's just going through via another method.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair?
Supervisor Euler?
Question, just point of clarification.
We have, over the years, had a number of conversations regarding floodplain and building in the floodplain. We have, over the years, had a number of conversations regarding building and filling within the floodplain. Is this a riparian corridor that's being referenced here?
Correct.
Huh?
I think both of these are riparian areas
Okay.
that run through there.
And annual streams, intermittent streams in those? Which, one or the other, or both, or?
I believe this one, and maybe I'll have our EIR consultant help me out here just so we have accurate information.
On the wetland
presented.
mitigation, the eastern swale is a wetland swale, or excuse me, wetland swale.
Which is this, we're talking about this one right through here.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, I don't think the audience
No, I didn't-
heard that.
You want to join me up here?
Yeah, please.
Thank you.
So the eastern drainage is designated as a wetland swale, not as an intermittent stream, and that habitat that surrounds it is riparian.
Okay, but the wetland swale, meaning when it's raining, you might see water running in there, otherwise during the course of the year, it's dry.
Let me double check.
And I'm sorry, would you give us your name, please, for the record?
Sure, sorry. Catherine Waugh. I'm with Dudek.
And can you spell your last name, please?
Sure, Waugh, W-A-U-G-H.
Thank you. Supervisor Duran, did you have a different question while she was looking that up?
Yes,
or-
I did, but this might take a little bit of time to explain. My question was, and one of the concerns I have is with regards to the cost to the county for a project, a multi-unit project. And I just wanted to get some clarification, because in reading the financials, it appears that we're kind of upside down to the tune of over $2 million a year. And I wanted to get some input from you as to what, are those actuals? How do we look at that? And is that a true number?
I would have to go back to the analysis to find the specific number. There was a fiscal analysis prepared for this project, as is required by the general plan. And it's not unusual for an all-residential project to not be fiscally neutral. When the county looks at fiscal projects such as this, we look at the fiscal impacts across the breadth of the county. And so while this project in and of itself may not be fiscally neutral, there are other higher use areas, commercial, industrial, higher end residential, that offset the impacts associated with a project like this.
So when you're looking at it, you're not looking at it at this particular project, you're looking at it how this project fits into the overall scheme of development within the county.
That is correct.
Okay, so and in that context, there are going to be some projects that pencil out, and there are going to be some projects like a multi-unit dwelling that doesn't pencil out.
That's correct.
Okay.
Well, and I think if I may, just more importantly, the viability of commercial requires that you have residential, and it's understood that residential is a cost, and commercial is a revenue source for local jurisdictions. But the commercial, for its viability, requires the residential that's assumed under the various plans.
And that's why the general plan takes into account the breadth of land uses across the entirety of the county, not in just one
Just one
geographic
specific,
area.
okay.
Good. I think we can get back to Supervisor Euler's question.
Sure. So the stream, both of those drainages on the site are mapped as intermittent streams on the county's drainage plans. And that means that they do carry water throughout the year, not continually, but in response to storm events, in response to drainage running off from properties that those swales pass through.
Exactly. Okay. And just, the reason I asked the question is for the record. When we've typically, as the example was brought up, out in the West Placer area, when we talked about building in the floodplains, we're talking about Linda Creek, an annual, all the time, water in it, salmon habitat kind of a stream, as opposed to what's essentially a drainage way during storm events. And we have across the county and all the cities within the county, we have engineered and made modifications to existing land features that accommodate for storm flow events. We've historically done it. We continue to do it.
Correct.
Although in the case of Homewood Mountain Resort, it was an intermittent stream as well, and we did require the developer of that project to relocate his project out of the area. So we've taken different approaches over time. Thank you. Anything else from you, EJ, before we, Supervisor Holmes?
Well, I just want to be clear about the zoning. The zoning, 10 units per acre, went into place in 1981.
Correct.
It carried through with the Loomis Basin General Plan in 1988 and went through again with the Horseshoe Bar Penryn Community Plan in 1994.
Correct.
So the zoning over the last 30 years has stayed at 10 units per acre. It hasn't changed.
That's absolutely correct.
Okay.
The only change was the actual
Designation.
classification where they changed the actual coding, but both of those zone districts allowed maximum of 10 units per acre.
Supervisor Euler?
Yeah, I apologize. I was holding my questions at the end, so EJ, I'm going to have you jumping back a little ways.
I'm not moving.
Actually, if you wouldn't mind jumping all the way back to slide 6 or 7, this is the issue of Gold Rush era architecture. I was looking forward to seeing what that looked like.
Oh,
I'm glad
or the
to
other
see-
way.
Well, I'll refer to the exhibits.
Okay, and that's what I was glad to see. It wasn't a tent village. That's kind of what I was expecting for Gold Rush era architecture.
Okay, so these are just two of the elevations, and like I said, there's 4 distinct villages in this area, and they're all going to have their own separate architecture. You have actual elevations in your board packet
Right.
of all the elevations in each village, and they're generally you can tell they're different, the different materials, setups, and so forth. But the question is, what is Gold Rush architecture? The community plan specifically says that architecture within the community plan areas should have either Gold Rush era style architecture, English settlement, or kind of like Japanese heritage. As long as I've been here with the county, it's always been difficult to define really what that is. If you look at the development that has occurred in the Penryn Parkway, I'm not sure if any development really solidly, puts a hold on what that architecture looks like. It's possibly in the eye of the beholder, but I think the gist of it is that the community wanted something that blends in with the natural environment, kind of in that rural, rural look. So this is what the applicant has come up with. If this project did get approved, they would have to go through a design review process with county staff, and we would have to look in detail as far as whether this meets that, that definition.
And I appreciate that, because that was kind of the nature of my question, is the inherent subjectivity to that determination of Gold Rush era architecture. As I drove the Penryn Parkway over the weekend just to look at the existing projects, the office complex on the south side of the freeway, the outlet stores, the 76 station, not necessarily a strong consistency in design elements. Some peak roof applications I noticed on each, the attempt to use earth tones and those kinds of things. And so from that standpoint, I guess if in as much as a 76 station can reflect Gold Rush era architecture, I guess we're seeing some sense of consistency here with this. Supervisor Holmes touched on the dates issue. As the only member of the Board of Supervisors that was actually here in 1994 when we adopted this community plan, Supervisor Wygant, of course, was on the Planning Commission at the time, and my recollection was the Planning Commission, like the Board of Supervisors, the Planning Commission vote was a unanimous vote to adopt the plan. The Board of Supervisors was also unanimous, with me being the one having made the motion. The dates of the zoning were important, but I think also important was the comment by Supervisor Ferrer at the time about this plan update 94 from a land use standpoint being nothing more than a readoption, essentially from a land use standpoint, a readoption of what had already existed. Most of the conversation in the plan from an update standpoint in 94 really focused on two primary areas. It was development standards within the Folsom Lake watershed area, and it was design review type related issues. And so hence our Gold Rush era architecture right there. Slide 14, if you would, please. I'm sorry, while you're on there, stop at 13. So staff's assessment of the zoning as it exists today and the combination of the two zone districts, the latter of which was established in 1988, adding the commercial zone area in 1988. But the zoning then that has been on this property, at least for those 24 years, would allow for 212 units, is that what you said?
The two properties combined.
Yeah.
212 units.
The two zonings combined, it's one piece of property, right? Or is it
There's
actually
actually
two APNs?
two parcels.
It is two APNs.
Two
Okay,
parcels. And the commercial zone district, so like I said, allows 1 unit for every 2,000 square
Right.
feet.
Okay. Then on to slide 14.
Oop.
You show on there the orchards and you reference the Penryn townhomes. The densities of those projects? Do you know?
Let's see, if I remember right, and Michael, let me know if I'm wrong, I believe the Orchards was somewhere in the tune of 8.2, 8.5 units per acre.
Okay.
This is this project right down here. There were 85 units, about 10 acres roughly, so that'd give you your 8.5 units per acre.
Okay.
Penryn Townhomes was a little less than that. I believe that was 7.3.
Okay. Thank you. And then the phrase relatively low density is something that when I met with the appellants that came up a couple of times, that how do you look at a project that allows for 10 units the acre and say that meets the threshold of relatively low density? And understanding that, as staff has explained it, the relatively low density and dimensions of that within the plan are largely outside of the scope of the development of the parkway itself. But even that withstanding, multifamily projects in other jurisdictions. If somebody's building a multifamily project in Roseville, what kinds of densities are people looking at in Roseville for multifamily projects?
I think Michael might have some information on that.
The city of Roseville tries to average somewhere between 20 and 22 units per acre for their multifamily zoning designation. Within their specific plans, they're trying to achieve up to 30 units per acre to be consistent with the new requirement from the State Department of Housing and Community Development.
So they're right now trying to achieve 30 units the acre?
Correct.
Okay. What about Rockland? Do we have any?
Rockland averages about 15 units per acre, although within some of their specific plans, they have allowed up to 20 units per acre.
Okay. And how about right next door in Loomis? What's the high-density designation?
They allow the Town of Loomis, if I'm remembering correctly, they have several multifamily designations. They have one that allows 10-plus units per acre, and then it goes up to, I believe, up to 15. And for their jurisdiction.
Okay. Issue of sewer has been raised. Within the Horseshoe Bar Community Plan area, my recollection in doing this plan some 18 years ago now was that sewer availability is fairly sporadic. I know that we have SMD 3 in the southeastern part of the plan area down by Horseshoe Bar Road and Auburn Folsom Road. But in terms of trunk lines and availability of sewer overall, My recollection is that the Parkway area is actually one of the few areas that has trunk line availability, let alone the issue of capacity, but the existence of sewer trunk lines.
Yeah, and that's what you see up on the exhibit, Supervisor Euler. These lines here are existing sewer lines and manholes. Penryn Road, the actual project site is right here, and that sewer line goes actually right through the property. That continues. I go to another map. Get my reference here. So right up here is the project site. As you come down towards Interstate 80, this sewer line continues on down all the way towards Boynton Road, where it serves the Orchards project as well.
And then, of course, down in the kind of southeast area of the plan area with SMD1 and the existence of sewer down there, which is why we have a couple of projects that are a little bit higher density, some half-acre projects in the SMD. Excuse me, not one, that's yours.
3.
SMD3, thank you. I don't want to talk about SMD1 today.
Not today.
SMD3, yeah, so we have sewer capacity down in that area, which of course is why the land uses are reflected in the community plan the way that they are. Where the sewer existed, we allowed for the higher densities, and where it doesn't, we kept it the larger rural estate lots. The issue of impacts being deemed significant and unavoidable. When you deal with an EIR, how uncommon is it to have findings of significant and unavoidable impacts?
In today's environment, it's fairly common to have significant and unavoidable impacts associated with environmental impact reports.
So most projects, the majority of projects that we see that have EIRs associated with them have identified significant and unavoidable impacts?
If I'm remembering correctly, I would say approximately 90% of the projects that the board has reviewed has had significant and unavoidable impacts.
Okay. And there's certainly nothing that has precluded the board or any other jurisdiction from certifying EIRs that identify significant and unavoidable impacts.
That's correct.
Okay. That's all I have for now. Thank you.
Supervisor Duran?
Yeah, I have a question with regards to densities and the plan. When we have a plan, and we're looking at it from the CEQA standpoint, we're not trying to achieve perfection. We're just trying to get close to that, correct? From a density standpoint?
I would, yes, I would agree.
Okay.
I did want to mention, EJ, if you could jump to slide number 48, this will actually get to Supervisor Euler's questions about what is Gold Rush design. It's a number of different things, including those horrifying tents that you were worried about, Kirk. We chose not to put a picture of a tent up, but I had the same question you did. What the heck is Gold Rush architecture? And we did come up with some slides. Sorry, they're at the very end of the presentation.
Okay, there's no
but I kind of thought the question might come up. There we go. So those are some different examples of Gold Rush architecture. Slide 49. Some of them are still habitable, actually, yes. Some of them are not. The one on the right is not. Could you go to the next slide? Yeah. And these are actually all within the Gold Country area here of sort of all our adjacent counties. The little house there on the right is actually up at Michigan Bluff. I don't think it's still standing. And then page 50. Slide 50. That's some other examples of Gold Rush architecture. Just to hope that brings a little clarity to your question.
Maybe we could put some hitching posts.
Some hitching posts, exactly. A water wheel, a grist mill, something. Okay, all right. Did you have anything else, EJ? Supervisor
Unless you don't have-
Duran?
Well, one more question, and this may be for the plan proponent. Well, what are the proposed rents for this particular development?
I'll have the applicant answer that question
Yeah.
for you.
Any other questions for EJ? I think the applicant's going to answer that when he presents. Yeah. Okay. All right, terrific. At this time, we will move to our first appellant, which is the Town of Loomis. What's that? Yes. And Rick will ask that you limit your presentation to 15 minutes, if you would.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members, Board of Supervisors, as well as your county council and new CEO. How you doing, Dave? My name's Rick Angelosi. I am town manager for Loomis. I come here today to reiterate the town's concerns, which we have previously submitted to you. First, to clarify, and number one, I want to congratulate EJ. He did pronounce my name correctly, which is rare. I want to clarify, the town is not against development, as I've heard previously mentioned. We're not against development of the project site. Rather, we want to ensure that the county complies with CEQA, that the impacts from the project are fully mitigated, and that the project is the best possible project that could move forward for this site. That's a standard planning principle that has gone on for years and years. As proposed, there are a number of impacts which we feel remain unmitigated, and a number that will result in significant and unavoidable impacts. I know the question just came up about previous approval of EIRs or EISs, which have significant unavoidable impacts. I agree. Basically with the premise that a number of projects that come forward identify those, but every effort should be made to reduce as many of those identified significant and unavoidable impacts to less than significant. In this particular project, I believe, as it stands, there's 6 unavoidable significant impacts that have been identified. While I can stand up here for probably over an hour discussing our previous comment letters, I know I'm limited to 15 minutes, so I will keep my presentation to just highlighting a few. I want you to focus. I know there's going to be a lot of testimony today, and you're going to almost be overwhelmed. Well, I'm sure you will be overwhelmed with the number of comments. So I'll focus just on a few today, so I can make my points fairly clear. And a number of good discussions already by the board concerning some of the issues contained in this. Traffic. I will talk very briefly about the resolution that my town council adopted and the process we're going through for the MOU with Placer County. When I came here about a year ago, I understood that was fairly common practice for projects located outside of our jurisdiction in the town of Loomis, where there are impacts on intersections or roadways within the town of Loomis. Since there were no formal agreements and no policies adopted by the town council, that the town never gained a fair share of the mitigation fee impacts. There was no guarantee, I agree, that the town would set those monies aside, do the mitigation measures identified in the environmental document, whether it's a mitigated negative deck or an EIR. What I've attempted to do is clarify that to a much higher degree. Resolution number 1223 adopted by our town council is located on page 362 of your packet. I believe if you go to that, and I won't spend much time on this, you will see that the town under the now therefore be it resolved, has made a commitment that any fair share which is given to the town is encumbered in specific funds to mitigate and implement the mitigation measures identified in the environmental impact report. So it's encumbered. Those mitigation fees cannot be used for general fund, to mitigate other impacts in town. They go to implement the impacts that the EIR in this example have identified. So there is a commitment on part of the town, and we are working with Ken and Supervisor Holmes on an MOU so that we understand that our capital improvement programs will include the mitigation measures that you have identified in the EIR. So I think...
Excuse me, Rick, you mean Ken Grimm, our Public Works?
Yes, Ken Grimm, the Public Works Director for Placer County. I believe you can now, with that resolution, safely require that the fair share be paid to the town of Loomis. This, to me, gives assurances to the county that those monies will be used to mitigate the impacts caused by the project. So that takes one of your significant unavoidable impacts off the table. It becomes less than significant with that simple change in your conditions.
Now, can I ask a question, sir?
Sure.
Wasn't the other part of the piece to this was the fact that we couldn't calculate the fair share because Loomis, Town of Loomis hadn't adopted their own process by which they could get to the mitigation fees?
The fair share actually is calculated.
Okay.
In the EIR and identified. It's just simply because there was no assurance that the town, actually how it was stated, there was no assurance that the town would accept the fee and implement the mitigation measure. It had to be make your best faced effort.
Okay.
Best
Thanks for
faced
clarifying that.
effort. I actually stood at the podium and said, give me the money. So pretty good assurance I'd take the money. Going to the school very briefly, the school issue, which, you know, in the overall concept of the project is a minor issue. I agree with you 100%. You know, this will help the ADA for both the Union School District as well as the high school. No issue there. They're both hurting on enrollment, and they have declining enrollment. My issue that I raised was concerning the traffic generation as identified in the EIR. On page 43 of your packet, we're up to 35, and I'll speak just simply to the high school. 35 high school students will be generated out of 150 housing units. And then we go to page 43, where using the ITE, which is generally acceptable, and I've used it for years, they talk about 9 vehicle trips in a peak hour. And I accept that. I don't accept the number, but I accept just using the peak hour to generate the trips, because that's when kids come to school, that's when kids leave to school. Calculating a vehicle trip means 1 trip onto the campus, pick up your kid, 1 trip off. That's 2 vehicle trips for that one action. If you use that, this is saying 4.5, let's say 4 or 5 students out of the 35 will travel by vehicle to the high school. 30 will walk or ride their bike. I don't think that's a realistic number. That's extremely low. I have 2 kids in high school. My eldest is now a senior. She's driving. And we try and double up. She takes her sister, who is a freshman. But I know for that school, they're just for 2 students out of 1 household, they make 4 trips a day back and forth to that high school.
And maybe this is a question for staff here, but is this within the zone of a bus route to the school?
I am not sure whether the school bus route runs out there. Michael, do you know?
And I know districts have changed their rates
Yes.
due to costs.
The cost, transportation is getting slimmer and
For the high school district, it would not be within the distance required to allow for a bus trip. I don't know for elementary, middle school.
Right. So, again, some alternative form of travel, and, you know, although we have beautiful weather down here, it's, there are many days where it's raining or it's really not conducive for bicycle or walking travel.
Rick, you have 5 more minutes.
For, how many?
5 more.
5 more, woo.
Yep.
Goes by quick.
Time flies.
Okay. Statement of overriding considerations. I'd refer you to page 311 of your packet. Should take me a second to get there, but I'll move along quickly. And I'll talk, that's a different one. We'll go to feasibility. The town was concerned that alternative B was rejected, the reduced alternative, due to the blanket statement in the original presentation to the Planning Commission that it was economically infeasible. If you turn to page 311 of your packet, the county received a financial analysis on October 2nd of this year. That was 8 days ago. That analysis was prepared on August 8th of this year, a little over 60 days ago. The Town of Loomis received that analysis this past Monday, 2.5 days ago. That makes it extremely difficult. This is a professional analysis by an economic specialist. I couldn't even get a specialist in to review the information in there in 2 days. This kind of seems like what they used to call document dumping. You throw it on at the last minute to answer something. You don't give the public, nor in this case the appellant's, times to review it to ensure that it's correct, the assumptions used are correct. But you're being asked today out of a 495-page document to accept that economic analysis and make your decision based on it. Going to the last item I really want to talk about is the statement of overriding considerations. You know, CEQA requires that a lead agency, which is you, weigh the significant unavoidable environmental impacts of a proposed project against specific benefits in order to properly base your approval of the project. I refer you to page 140 and 189 in the packet, and I'll ask you to look at those simultaneously. On page 140, listed items 1 through 7 are the project proponents' objectives for the project. On page 189, although not numbered, but bulleted, are the findings, basis for the findings of overriding consideration of what the project will provide. This is the first time in my 32 years of experience dealing with hundreds, and Supervisor Montgomery is aware of this, of EIRs and EISs where the lead agency has actually regurgitated the project proponents' objectives as being statements as to why the significant unavoidable impacts should be overlooked. They are so narrow. I'll take you to number 7. The objective was to provide 150 residential units. The bullet number 7 says 150 residential units. That's the benefit. That being so narrow means that 149 units would not provide a reason for your statement of overriding consideration. You can't even consider anything less using both the project proponents' objectives and your statements of overriding consideration. So obviously that is of concern to us. Since I'm getting down to about a minute in my head, I'd like to close by just saying we received 495 pages of material. You did too. Awful lot to read through. I know I had a town council meeting with a couple of contentious items on Tuesday night. That took Tuesday night out of the picture for me, so I had Monday afternoon and yesterday afternoon to review the 495 pages. I feel tremendous amount of substantial new information has been presented here, and that in itself would cause me to request you to return this back to the Planning Commission, let the public take a look at the substantial amount of new information, and potentially recirculate the final EIR. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rick. Okay, I think we'll wait on any additional board clarifications or questions until we've heard the second appellant. Is that okay with the board? All right, thank you. All right, if we could have the second appellant come forward, Stop 150 Apartments, whoever is representing them. There we are. Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the board, my name is Keith Wagner. I'm with the law firm Lippy Gaffney Wagner, LLP. I represent the Stop 150 Apartments group and submitted the August 7th appeal letter that is included in your board packet. The grounds for appeal raised by Stop 150 include both issues under the California Environmental Quality Act in terms of the EIR's inadequate disclosures of potential impacts and violations of the city or the county's own zoning and general plan law. With regard to the first point, the legal standards as set forth in cases such as Lesher, Midway Orchards, and Napa Citizens is that a county simply cannot approve a project that conflicts with overlying general plan and zoning, or that would frustrate the implementation of those standards. In this case, much has been said by staff and in the reports and here today about what the zoning would allow in isolation in this project in terms of the actual application of the zoning on the particular parcels. The problem is that when the county adopted its zoning ordinance, it stated that it is the intent of the Placer County Board of Supervisors that this chapter be adopted and maintained so as to be consistent with the general plan and applicable community plans. The zoning ordinance then goes on to say that when conflicts occur between the provisions of this chapter and standards adopted by ordinance and any applicable community plan, including those areas within the jurisdiction of the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, the provisions of the community plan shall apply. In other words, what this is saying is the zoning is relevant for these parcels to the extent that it states outward maximums of what could happen in the absence of any limitations otherwise imposed by the community plan. In this case, the community plan imposes exactly such limitations. Exactly such limitations. The community plan says that development in the Penryn Parkway shall be of a relatively low density. And the community plan actually defines outright what low density is, which is 0.4 to 2.3 acres per dwelling, which yields a maximum of 2.5 dwellings per acre when you turn the math around. Medium density residential at 2 to 4 units per acre, high density 4 to 10. The maximum density allowed anywhere in this community plan under high density standards is 10 dwelling units per acre. And that's what this project does for every last acre in the Penryn Parkway. Yet the plan says must be of relatively low density. Now the response to this is that staff has pointed to a policy that says, well, what relatively low density means is 2 stories. That's not a reasonable interpretation. That's an unreasonable interpretation. Density means density. doesn't mean height. It means density. How many units per acre? In this case, this plan allows a maximum, even at medium density, of 4 dwelling units per acre. That's what this plan allows in the Penryn Parkway. Any development that is proposed for this site that would exceed that density is a violation of the community plan and the county zoning. And that's what this project does at 150 units per acre. We also note in our comment letter a range of other policies that are being violated, or at least being frustrated in their implementation, which is the legal standard established in the Napa Citizens case. I don't have time to go through all of them, but they are a matter of record, and they are all, or the project is inconsistent with each and every one of them. Under the California Environmental Quality Act, there is also a substantial number of violations that have been raised by members of the public. Our letter focuses on a few key areas. Once again, almost immediately returning to the same theme, one of the questions that CEQA asks is whether a project would have significant impacts due to inconsistencies with overlying community plan or general plan standards. And in this case, because the EIR does not recognize the violation that I've just described to you, it does not recognize the impacts associated with putting 150 apartments into a land use designation that would allow at most 60. In the case of this project, the various tables that are presented in the community plan make it clear that where there's any inconsistency, once again, between the zoning that is available and the plan statement for the parkway, which is relatively low density, the plan is what controls. This is also of note because one of the policies that the plan has within it, even for the multifamily designation or recognition of the multifamily use within the Penryn Parkway, is that such multifamily use must be clustered so as to save the maximum amount of biological resources, those wetland areas and riparian resources that we discussed before. This project proposes clustering at 10 units per acre. Once again, under the allowable zoning and the maximum number of units being allowed being 60 for this site, that means that these sites or these units should be clustered in such a way to save a significant portion of the project area for the biological resources that are there. Would also note it would save a substantial amount of money both to the developer and the county, because in this case, one of the activities involved in the project is an extensive cleanup that is required before you could put residences on the site. If these sites are left in their natural condition, that cleanup isn't required. The resources are preserved. Significantly also here today, you heard testimony that clustering actually in other jurisdictions reaches levels of 15 to 20 to even over 20 units per acre. So even this plan at 10 units per acre, even if you could justify the 150 units, is not properly clustered to meet the plan's standards. It should be 15 or 20 units per acre, meaning that half the site could still be saved for those biological resources. All that this does is all that this plan does is wall-to-wall, property line to property line development, with the exception of one small riparian area through the middle of the project. In sum, regardless of the EIR's off-site mitigation measures for biological resources, preserving anything less than 9 of the on-site acres conflicts with the plan's clear and mandatory standards, so that's a general plan zoning violation, but also the EIR failed to recognize the loss of those resources as significant, where the plans do not allow for it. There was also inadequate investigation and disclosure of the existing environment. In particular, the issue that we've raised there is the stormwater flows through the sewer. Calculations were presented in the EIR based on dry weather measurements of existing flows, and based on presumed flows of what would be considered, I suppose, an actual use. The problem is that when you go to the studies that were cited in the EIR, they actually recommend different methodologies because of safety factors that are required when measurements are taken in dry weather. And essentially, we run through the numbers in the letter. And what it makes clear in the letter that we have here is that actually this project, if the standards even recommended in the study that is cited, that is an appendix to the EIR, had been followed, which the EIR does not, then it indicates this sewer is over capacity just with this project. Another problem is that in terms of cumulative impacts with the sewer, there is no information about downstream capacity that was in the EIR. In other words, we really don't know, even if at the project inception point where the sewer takes on the water from this project, we don't know what the condition is enough downstream to know how that's going to really impact the sewers cumulatively. Now, the response to this from staff is, well, we've talked with other folks. We've looked at, some of these things. We've talked with the South Placer Municipal Utility District, and don't worry, everything's going to be okay. The twofold problem with that, first of all, we don't really have that evidence or information in front of us, but most importantly, that evidence and information wasn't in the publicly circulated draft EIR. And the courts have made clear, Mountain Lion Coalition case at the Court of Appeal, which was incited by the Supreme Court in Laurel Heights 2, and eventually became a CEQA guideline itself, is that you cannot add new information to a final EIR that was circulated to that has not been circulated for the public review process, and then just approve a project. In other words, where this information is supposed to go is into a revised, recirculated draft EIR. That is required here as a matter of law. And the question is not whether, at that point, sewer capacity is or not adequate. It simply is not the question, because you cannot get to questions of evidence when CEQA's procedures have been violated. And that's what the court said in Mountain Lion Coalition and in Laurel Heights 2. With regard to cumulative impacts, what's notable here is that we did call out the Clover Valley project as one that was not cited. The response to that is, well, it's outside of the scope of the area. Problem is that the EIR cites the Bickford Ranch project. Pull up a map. Look at where those two projects are. You tell me which one's closer. Those two projects, how could you distinguish between the two of them given how they contribute to regional traffic and other impacts? It makes no sense. It is a backward-looking attempt to just simply say, well, we messed up, but instead of admitting it, we're just going to say this is outside the scope because we didn't realize we should have included it. Another significant project, by the way, that is missing and is not mentioned in any of the documents here, but that has been identified by my clients, is the Rockland Crossings project at Sierra College Boulevard as well. The EIR does not define the scope of its cumulative impacts analysis adequately. Also, even though it does list a number of projects, it provides no information on those projects. In other words, it simply lists the project, says, well, we considered these cumulatively, and there's not going to be any significant cumulative effect. Well, the problem there is that we don't know, without the information, how do we know that that's true? It's simply not presented in the EIR. And that's what the EIR is for, is to allow the public to be informed and allow them to respond so that you as decision makers have all available viewpoints, not just those in favor of the project, not just those who think the project is a great idea or that their studies are perfect, but those who can see that there may be issues or problems and that you would want to consider. Once again, because the EIR does not address these cumulative impact issues, the board must, at a minimum, have a revised and recirculated draft EIR sent out so the public can meaningfully understand these cumulative impacts and respond. Finally, I would note, as I understand today, is that we only have 4 supervisors here. And I do want to point out that CEQA has a provision that makes it very clear that where an unelected body certifies an EIR, the public has a right to appeal that decision. And so as we stand here today, if it is the event that this board winds up with tie votes on the question of whether this EIR is adequate or whether the project should be approved, That would mean there is no project approval on this project. It does not matter what the Planning Commission did or said. There is some ambiguity potentially in the county code in terms of what the Planning Commission decides and how this board takes up the appeal. I think that Supervisor Duran said it best as we started this proceeding. This is a de novo proceeding, and it must be so under the statute, because the public has a statutory right under state law to have this board, as their elected officials, make its decisions. With that, my presentation, I believe I'm done. What I would point out is that I have, unfortunately, another conflicting appointment early this afternoon, which will take me away. So what I would request, if possible, is that if the board has any questions regarding my presentation, whether it's right now or perhaps right after the applicant's presentation, that we be able to have that exchange, because I would not be able to stay all the way through the public testimony portion to respond at the end.
Okay, I think we'll start with Supervisor Euler in that case because his light is on.
Yes, thank you. Throughout your presentation, you kept referencing the maximum allowable units as 60 units. How did you arrive at that?
Well, the math is in our letter here. And so where we, let me see, make those calculations is, oh, that's the policies.
I guess what I'm wondering is, what are the assumptions behind?
Oh, okay. Well, the assumption is that the community plan has a maximum medium density standard of 4 units per acre.
Okay.
And so this project is on 15 acres of land.
Okay.
And so 15 times 4 equals 60.
Yes. And though zoning specifically enumerates, as staff articulated, the potential of up to 212 units, I believe it was, 212 units, based on the zoning, you just say that we should, regardless of what the zoning says and the zoning map says, we should apply this medium density residential standard.
As the maximum, it's not even medium. What the plan says is low density, and it's not me that is saying that's what you should apply. It's your zoning code.
Where exactly does the plan say that we have low density that supersedes the zoning that's specified for the piece?
It's not the plan that says that. It is the county's zoning that says that. What the county's zoning code says is that where there is a conflict between assigned zoning to a parcel
Right.
and a community plan,
Okay.
the community plan prevails.
Okay. The zoning within the community plan versus zoning within the countywide general plan, is that correct? A zoning designation within the community plan where it conflicts with the zoning designation in the general plan?
Now, where there's a parcel that has zoning,
Yes.
okay, and in this case, there's no argument that the zoning is for multifamily 10 units.
Right. Part
Per
of it.
acre, for the 10 acres, and then we have this commercial
Right.
area, which we do not agree with staff as well on that
Okay.
piece. But what the county's zoning code says is that if there is a conflict between a community plan
Right.
and the assigned zoning for a parcel,
Right.
the community plan prevails.
Right. So
And
what
our
you're-
point-
So in other words, you're not distinguishing between the design guideline and the reference within the design guideline to relatively low density as a design guideline for developing within the area. You're saying that somehow by using the expression relatively low density, that overrides all existing zoning within the plan so that the entirety of the plan then must be developed out consistent with this mathematical formula that you put forward. In other words, there's no place within the Horseshoe Bar community plan area where we would be allowed to approve a project at a density greater than 4 units to the acre?
Yes, there is a place, and it's outside of the Penryn Parkway, which is where the relatively low density standard applies.
So then, in other words, the design guidelines for the Penryn Parkway are what you're drawing from, a design guideline that says, that uses the expression relatively low density under the design guideline. No place in the zoning are you saying our plans are in conflict. In the actual zoning itself, is there any place where our plans are in conflict, where one document, our general plan has something, and our community plan has something else?
Your zoning code says where a community plan conflicts with the underlying
Understood.
zoning, the community plan prevails.
Understood.
The community plan for Penryn Parkway area says relatively low density, and your community plan defines defines medium density as a maximum of 4 units per acre. The community plan does have other areas that do not have the limitation the Penryn Parkway plan area does. And in those areas, and in particular, the plan actually calls out an area within the plan where there's a trailer park, or where a trailer park can have up to 10
I recall.
per acre. There's no dispute over that because it's consistent with the plan. The plan says this place can have up to 10
Okay,
per acre.
and I get all that, but I just want to be clear. What you're saying is the use of the phrase relatively low density in our design guidelines segment is what you think should drive the zoning allowed from a land use standpoint, and therefore everything within the Placer Parkway is in conflict. Basically, everything within the Placer Parkway has been developed has been inappropriately developed because none of it would be consistent with the standard that you've just set.
Actually, that's untrue because within the Placer Parkway, there's quite a bit of different
I'm
kinds
sorry,
of
not Placer,
developments.
Penryn.
I'm sorry, yeah, Penryn Parkway. There's various kinds of development. There are 2 residential developments that exceed the allowable standards, to be sure. To be sure. But the remainder of the site, there is no dispute about, all of the density is very low. And actually, when you go out and just drive that road, as I'm sure all of you have done, that's another thing is that what the plan says is preserve the character of this area. You drive down that portion of the Penryn Parkway, you tell me where you find wall-to-wall, 10 units per acre apartments. They aren't there. This is not consistent with this portion of Parkway.
Okay, but just to clarify, what you are comparing by use of relatively low density, that phrase from the design guidelines, and saying that somehow that then should supersede the land use designation that's been in place since 1981.
Yes, Supervisor. As I am pointing out, you keep pointing out that this is the design review. What I would add to that is the design review as printed in the community plan, which supersedes zoning.
And just to clarify for the record, those calculations are on pages 54 and 55 of your letter, I believe.
Yes, that is correct. That is where they show up because we were assessing essentially the densities in terms of the environmental effects that result when you spread this development out over the full 15 acres at 10 per acre.
Any other questions at this time? All right. Thank you very much. We appreciate your time here today, and we're sorry you can't join us later. At this time, we're going to move on and let the project proponent have 15 minutes as well.
Madam Chair, members of the board, Marcus LaDuca and Abdis, 3200 Douglas Boulevard in Roseville. On behalf of the property owner and applicant, I'm pleased to be before you with a project with a recommendation for approval from your staff, as well as approval by your planning commission. For again, as the staff report has noted, is consistent with the community plan and the Penryn Park, including the Penryn Parkway policies of that plan and the property zoning that has been in place for many years. My client has developed projects in Sacramento and Placer counties for 28 years and are long-term owners and managers of their properties. So this is a case with a project where they're going to be in the community for a long time. They pride themselves on being good neighbors and also being contributing members of the community. For the project before you, as you heard from staff, the planning process began in 2005, And over the last 7 years, my client has worked through a whole range of issues raised by your staff and has attempted to also address concerns raised by members of the community. And as you've already heard from the appellants and from the many people signed up today, people still oppose the project in the community, but it really doesn't detract from the fact my client has solicited input at 5 to 6 MAC meetings and has also met with adjacent property owners to hear of their concerns. One of those owners is one of the appellants, Mr. Uppal, and again, remains opposed to the project, but my client did attempt to address the main design concern of that neighbor by moving an entire building away from that neighbor's backyard at not insignificant cost. Several years ago, and you'll probably hear this later on during the public testimony, your staff expressed concerns over aspect of the project design and also benefits of the project. At that time, my client switched architects and completely retooled the site plan, addressing staff concerns and community comments regarding a range of issues, among those being site layout, protection of rock outcroppings, expanded setbacks, preservation of a portion of the central swale, and expansion of on-site recreation areas. Your staff and my client worked through all the issues with the project. And what you have before you is a project, as you heard earlier today, with the full recommendation of your staff, albeit with 119 conditions with which we're in full agreement with, and the Planning Commission made not a single change to those conditions in taking action to approve the project. But let's really focus on the key issues of today, as you've just heard in terms of been raised by the appellants. The first and major issue that's been raised is that the project is inconsistent with the community plan. Again, those who advise you, your staff, and the county's AR consultant disagree, as did your Planning Commission. As a land use professional for the last 26 years who has dealt with planning and zoning interpretations on projects throughout the state of California, I find they must also disagree with that line of argument. The objections based on a purported inconsistency with the community plan are misplaced, particularly when you look at all the language in terms of the relevant policies of the community plan. To begin with, this staff report noted, and as was discussed at the Planning Commission hearing, the Penryn Parkway land use designation, not high-density residential or any other land use designation, is the community plan land use designation within the Penryn Parkway corridor. That's the land use designation. Again, that's a land use designation that applies to 166 acres, or 1% of the 25 square miles in the community plan area. As Mr. Euler has already noted from his time on the board when the community plan came up for adoption in 1994, the entire purpose of the Penryn Parkway corridor was to focus higher density, higher intensity land uses near the I-80 interchange, not have small commercial parcels and higher density projects throughout the community, but instead of looking at that 25 square mile area, concentrated on 1% near the I-80 interchange. In that area, there isn't any other community plan designation. It's Penryn Parkway. The policies that are highlighted in the staff report, and which I'll review shortly, and as your staff has raised, provide the only relevant basis, along with the property zoning, for determining whether the project is consistent with the community plan and the implementing zoning, which again, as staff has noted, has been around for over 3 decades, since 1981. As for the text of the community plan itself, the barely 3-page section of the community plan on the Penryn Parkway mentions 4 separate times of multifamily uses, and that those uses are specifically allowed, which makes sense recognizing the community plan's discussion regarding allowed uses on a transportation corridor, and also, as you've heard, where available infrastructure is to serve such development. The zoning in the corridor, and it's stated in the Penryn Parkway corridor portion of the community plan, is the implementing mechanism for development in the Penryn Parkway. Our project with 2 parcels, one at 10 units to the acre and one with C1, is entirely consistent with the zoning on the property that's been in place again for 31 years. Again, that zoning would allow up to 212 units, more than 40% more than what we're proposing. So contrary to the wall-to-wall and covering the entire site, that is not, in fact, what is taking place here.
Excuse me.
Sure.
Mr. Leduca, Could you comment on the calculations that they made here with regards to the 60 units? Where is the flaw in that?
Well, the flaw is this. When you look at that portion of the community plan, that policy that talks about relatively low density, that's not a community plan designation. What they're in essence saying is saying that basically you take the maximum of the MDR zone, they are saying that in essence, all the property, including this parcel in the Penryn Parkway corridor, had a community plan amendment sometime in the last, basically 18 years that said it's not Penryn Parkway corridor, it's MDR. The actual policy says relatively low density, and then it goes on, and again, you haven't really heard the rest of the focus of that policy. It talks about lighting and signage that's consistent with such a policy, and then defines density. And the way it defines density is in terms of a relatively low profile, low density type is 2 stories. When the argument, comment was just made relative to, well, it should be at 15 or 20 if this is high density and looking what's in other cities. No, because the policy, by saying it's 2 stories in height, defines the density. If you want 15 or 20, and I've represented a lot of apartment builders throughout this region, you're looking at 3-story or 4-story. By saying by lowering the profile of the buildings to 2-story, it sets the density. Again, we talked, you've heard about the design and what reasonable minds might differ relative to what is Gold Rush architecture. But again, the intent from the work of the architect was to address staff's concerns with the original site plan and go in and really change the entire site plan, change the design of the buildings, and try to, as much as possible, reflect the type of architecture called for in that same policy in the community plan. The project also looked to, again, in response to comments from your staff, to cluster buildings so to preserve a number of the rock outcroppings on site and also much of that central swale. Now, you're going to hear, I'm sure, comments later today. They'll point to a letter issued by the Planning Department in 2007 relative to public benefits and community benefits. We see those benefits as being 7-fold. First is removal of a contaminated site from the community at a cost to my client approaching $1 million. Second is generation of $4.6 million in various fee programs for the county, school districts, and various agencies, including fire districts. Third is generation of $41 million in total economic output, including $4.8 million in income for those working on the site and 240 construction jobs. And getting to a comment raised by Supervisor Duran earlier, provision of attainable housing in the community for household income levels ranging from $55,000 roughly to $68,000, with rents ranging from $1,375 for a 2-bedroom carriage unit to $1,700 for a 3-bedroom townhouse unit, allowing a deputy sheriff, a firefighter, a nurse, a school teacher, an office worker, a retail store manager, and many other working families a chance to live in this community. Fifth is development of a smart growth project fully consistent with the SACOG Blueprint project, meeting 6 different blueprint policies, namely housing choices, transportation choices, use of existing assets by building on an infill site, quality design in close proximity to non-residential land uses in terms of a mix of uses, and protection of natural resources through what's being done with the central swale and also relative to the rock outcroppings. Next, provision of a ready and nearby customer base for commercial uses at the Penryn Outlets Commercial Center and other commercial uses in the community. And I'd like to, and again, getting to Supervisor Euler's point relative to getting rooftops to be able to help commercial centers, we have a petition signed by 5 property owners at the Penryn Outlets, along also with the 76 station, supporting this project and looking at what the benefit could be to their businesses. I'd like to hand the original to the clerk, and I also have copies in for the board.
Actually, if you'll just hand them all to the clerk, she'll get them distributed to us. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I just have a real quick question.
Supervisor Duran?
Mr. Leduca, even assuming all of those 7 items are true, is community benefit a part of the analysis?
Not under state planning law. You have certain findings you have to make. Whether you approve or deny a project, you have to make certain findings. basically in consistency with general plan, community plan, zoning, standards and policies contained therein, standards of the county, that kind of, type of analysis, but that isn't. Finally,
I'm sorry, are you still going down your list of 7?
Yes.
Okay.
on my last one.
Thank you.
Again, provided that there's no litigation challenging the project, my client has also pledged $75,000 to the Del Oro High School pool project and $25,000 to the Penryn Elementary School for its ball field project. We ask for your positive action today to deny the appeal, approve the project as presented and recommended by your staff and as approved by the Planning Commission. We also have CEQA counsel Sabrina Teller here to answer any questions you may have relative to the presentation that was made earlier by Mr. Wagner. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I have a couple of quick questions for you. You're listing these 7 different items as things which sort of go above and beyond to benefit the local community. In terms of the removal of contaminated soil, is that not a requirement for this project?
To have residential land use on the site, but again, one of the policies is actually at several places in the community plan is the discussion about water quality and impact to streams. The water just keeps rolling over the site. Contamination could be rolling to those streams.
I understand that, but if you build something on there, I understand you can just leave it as it is and you don't have to do anything to it. But if you build something on there, you are required to do that work, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. The dollars to special districts, those are required as part of the project approval, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Well, for example, school facilities. You pay school fees for school facilities. The school district may not build any more facilities or may build facilities, but it's not just serving the 51 elementary school students and junior high students coming from the project. Other members of the community who have children that go to that new facility funded from those fees gain a benefit.
Of course. And when I pull a project on my house, I have those same fees.
Right.
So it's required as part of the project. What I'm trying to identify, and I'm not trying to pick on you, is what are these additional community benefits that you're really talking about? Because going down this list, what I heard is the same set of requirements that we give to any project proponent. And so what I'm trying to identify, because we do have this letter from 2007, is what is this additional community benefit that you're creating through this project? And frankly, when I hear we'll give money to the schools if no one sues us, that grates on my nerves.
If we're looking, for example, at the economic...
No, please. I don't want to have any applause, any hissing, any booing. This is not a popularity contest. We're trying to get at a solution here. Thank you.
Thank you. You don't score any points with us up here going outside of the decorum. So thank you.
When you look at, for example, the investment in the project, jobs created, there's a benefit. The county benefits from that, from having it going from a vacant land to having someone develop that and having workers earning, buying supplies in the area, what have you.
Would the project proponent commit to hiring local construction company? And
you don't know who your
employees?
contractor is going to come from. They haven't bid the project yet. They haven't even gone to that point. The other, looking at also relative to attainable housing, which is talked about in the community plan. It's a general plan policy that governs, we talk about the layers of land use policies. There's zoning, community plan, and there's general plan. You have general plan policies, you have requirements from HCD under your housing element, and the idea of trying to provide attainable housing for a range of household income types. Not everyone can live in a $2 million home. And the idea is with the Penryn Parkway corridor policies of the community plan was to locate any higher density, higher intensity type uses in one area near the interchange. Again, we're going forward and attempting to do that with this project. The board has been supportive. Again, it's on an adopted policy, been supportive of the SACOG blueprint. Sometimes you've had SACOG here, not so happy with some of the things the board has done. Here's a project fully consistent. This is exactly what they're talking about relative to that. So I think in terms of those are benefits. They're area wide. I think they're in some cases get county-wide benefits.
Thank you. Supervisor Euler?
Yes. Perhaps Michael or maybe even Jerry, this notion of quote-unquote public benefit from a development. If a project is coming in consistent with the zoning allowed in a community plan and not requesting any kind of zone change, general plan amendment, or anything like that, Has it historically been the county's practice that we require the project applicant to contribute something beyond the mitigations required by our codes?
No, it has not been.
And in fact, would we not be subject to, and this is where I'd bring it to Jerry, would we not be subject to and likely lose a nexus lawsuit should we try to hang on any individual project applicant conditions of approval that go beyond the impacts generated by that project?
And the law has been pretty consistent over the last 30 years that conditions imposed on a project has to have a nexus to its impact.
So this notion that there should be some kind of public benefit that the project applicant should show up with beyond what mitigates their impacts is not found either in our county code, our county practice, or in state law. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you.
Supervisor Duran?
Yeah, I'd like to get back to the question that Supervisor Montgomery asked. The project component, is he committed to using local folks to take care of this project?
I mean, typically, you'll have contractors in the area, but again, they aren't even at a point of going through design review and being able to bid this out. The problem is if you have something, for example, it's a commitment, puts in a condition in any way, it gets bid out and people don't bid, they have to then come back through the approval process and try to be able to do that. And the idea is, and I don't believe it's ever been a condition on any project in the county that I'm aware of that's a requirement, because you don't know who's going to bid.
I'm not asking for a requirement. I'm just asking a general question as to whether or not the project proponent is willing to consider that. Are you?
As a practical matter, all the subs are here anyway. Sure.
That's all I have.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. At this time, thank you, Marcus.
Thank you.
At this time, I'm going to just bring it back to the board for any Jennifer, that's my name, general clarifications and questions that we might have for any of the folks who presented in front of us so far. Supervisor Holmes.
Yeah, I'm troubled by the four-unit designation per acre and the 10-unit zoning. Can you clarify that so I have a little better understanding of what prevails?
In what the speaker was referring to was a statement in the county's zoning ordinance, which states when conflicts occur between the provisions of this chapter, the zoning ordinance, and standards adopted by ordinance in any applicable community plan, the provisions of the community plan shall provide or shall apply. In this case, we have applied the standards that are in the community plan. The Horseshoe Bar Penryn Community Plan has its own zoning designations. The Horseshoe Bar Penryn Community Plan has its own zoning standards. Those are the standards that have been applied to this project. So in staff's analysis, the project is consistent, and the standards that are being applied are those set forth in the Horseshoe Bar Penryn Community Plan.
So the Penryn Parkway has a special designation?
Yes, it does.
Supervisor Euler?
Yeah, just to expound upon that, Michael, again, drawing upon recollection sometimes can be sketchy. It was 18 years ago that I made the motion to approve this plan. So going back and looking at the minutes, I'm reminded of Chairman at the time, Alex Ferreira, advising my colleague at the time, Ron Lehow, that early on in the process of creating the Horseshoe Bar Penryn Community Plan, the board authorized staff and the Planning Commission to entertain very minimal land use changes, which is why consistently throughout the area covered by the Horseshoe Bar Community Plan, if you go back and do map overlays of the old Loomis Basin Plan and the other plans that existed that are now encompassed by the Horseshoe Bar Community Plan area, you will see almost no discernible land use changes, which include the zoning designations in the Penryn Parkway area. Is that correct?
That is a correct statement.
Okay. And to Mr. LaDuca's point, should our board then have adopted a planning standard that would have de facto limited the development density to 4 units to the acre by virtue of the policy that was referenced, that in effect would have been a downzone of the existing zoning on that property, zoning that had existed at that point for almost 13 years. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So clearly, the assertion that this one phrase of relatively low density used in the design guideline portion is in direct conflict with the stated intent of the Board of Supervisors by the chairman at that hearing that our board not change zoning as a part of this plan and therefore re-adopt the zoning that was in effect at the time that we adopted this plan in 1994.
Correct. And as the board is aware, when you're looking at community plans, you need to look at the totality of the document. You can find certain policies, goals that may appear to be in conflict with what's being proposed. But when you look at the totality of the plan, which the staff has done in this case, it has been concluded that the proposed project is consistent with the community plan as set forth by the Board of Supervisors.
Thank you.
Supervisor Duran.
Yes, I'd like you to address the comment that was made by one of the project opponents on the absence of information on comparable projects with regards to not having the Rockland project in, not having the cumulative effects. Yeah.
When we look at comparable projects, we look at the sphere of influence and what may have an impact on this project site. It is a judgment call, and in consultation with county council and others, it was concluded that the projects that were identified in the analysis were projects that would have a reasonable impact on this project. I apologize, I don't have the Clover Valley community plan here with me, but my recollection is the traffic for Clover Valley goes out to Midas Avenue and does not come out to Sierra College.
So the standard is not every project, it's projects that have an adverse effect on the situation.
That's correct.
Okay. And also, I'd like you to comment on the identical use of the language starting on page 140 and drafting over to 141, along with staff's recommendations as well. And that is the, remediate and reuse contaminated land by developing a use that is consistent with zoning and land use designations for the site. And then the paragraph 7, providing 150 residential units supporting infrastructure, which is a project size that supports the required public improvements, toxic cleanup, and mitigation.
What specifically, I guess I'm just...
Is it uncommon to use the same language that the project proponent uses?
No, it's not uncommon. We look to the project applicant to provide justification as to why the project should be supported. Staff has looked at that language, found it to be applicable, and has incorporated it within the recommendation that sits before your board this morning.
And applicable word for word?
In some instances, yes, that has happened.
Okay.
Thank you. I have a couple of just clarifying questions that will help me understand we'll be moving forward with. I'm glad this slide is up because this is perfect. Looking at the preliminary landscape plan, I'm trying to figure out what the effect would be in terms of total units if the structures that were closest to existing properties with existing structures were reduced to 1 story rather than 2, so as to reduce impacts to immediate neighbors. So I'm looking at, there's 2, I think, I'm not quite sure what they are, up at the top I think it's near the Upples residence. Those were the 2 that were already realigned, I believe. Those, yeah. If those became 1 story, how many units would be lost in that?
Four.
Okay, I'm hearing 6 and I'm hearing 4. Do I hear 3?
Yeah, well,
what I'm really trying to get at here is what would the effect of making changes in some very specific areas along the property lines be in terms of the economic viability of the project and in terms of the impacts to the local neighbors? And I'm not quite sure if our staff can answer that, but I'm really just trying to come up with some very specific numbers. I know we received a letter or I at least did today, an email from the gentleman who is the principal, I believe, at the church just south, I believe that is, of the cluster of yellow structures along the fence line. And then I don't believe we've heard anything from the property owner on the right at the top of that slide, but I know some of the concerns are sort of the mass and the looming and all of that, and so how many units would be lost if those pieces were to become, those pieces of this proposal were to become one story?
We would have to defer to the applicant and as to how best they would redesign the project. As staff looks at it, there are 4 units facing the northern property line there, and so if you took those from 2-story units down to 1-story units, you would be losing 4 units in that area.
Marcus, did you want to come forward if you have more clarity? So thank you.
The townhome units are in the front, and then you have the carriage units in the back. If you reduce to 1 stories, you lose all the units because they're 2-story units, they're townhomes. So it's not just you're cutting a few units off the edge. It means you're losing all the units around the edge of the project, and you're left with carriage units.
Okay, so what about the yellow ones on the bottom there?
Right, you lose you lose every single unit. It's not just, you basically, if there's 6 townhome units there, or let's say there's 4 townhome units and 2 carriage units, you're losing all the townhome units. It's a total, because they're not 1-story units, they're 2-story units. That's what the townhomes are, and those are the larger units, as opposed to the carriage units, which are the smaller ones at 1,150 square feet. The other ones are larger, and those are 2 stories. You don't just have 1-story townhome units on this project.
They're all 2-story, all these buildings?
Correct.
Okay, what I'm trying to get at is, are there any of them along the property lines that are separated by story, so that one set of people live on the ground, the other set of people live on the top? Okay, so all those units, and that's a total of, I think, 12, would be lost then?
Well, if you go around to the south, the northeast, northeast, northwest, and the south, it's more than 12.
No, I'm not proposing all of them. I'm proposing the ones that are immediately adjacent to the church with the school, and then the ones that are immediately adjacent to the Upples. I'm just trying to understand what that would be. So say they're all 2 stories.
Yeah, it's about 10%.
And say we lost them all. So that would be about 15 units?
Right there.
Okay.
Ballpark.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. The other question I had, just as a clarifying question for myself, is this is proposed to be a gated community. Our county policy is that we don't support gates and gated communities, though every time we have this discussion I get outvoted. Is there anything in the Penryn Parkway or in the larger community plan that discusses gates specifically?
Yeah, I'm not as aware of anything specific in the Horseshoe Bar Penryn Community Plan. There are Placer County design guidelines that address gates. For the most part, in most community plans in the county, they are discouraged. This is a multi-family residential project, which typically when we talk about gates, we're always referring to, kind of lot and block subdivisions, plan developments, and so forth. So, with a multi-family development, the feasibility of having the gates here, I don't think there's anything specific in the policies that just actually prohibit the gates, but there may be that discourage them just in general.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking just at the from the Horseshoe Bar Penryn Community Plan 1994, page 4 of that. F, General Community Goals, Item 4, provide for residential development which creates functional, attractive, cohesive neighborhoods which are reasonably integrated with adjoining neighborhoods rather than physically isolated from their surroundings. And to me, the gate is just it's a physically isolating structure. And so I was just wondering, other than that reference within the community plan, is there anything else either specific to Penryn Parkway or to the larger community plan that references gates, community cohesiveness, neighborhoods?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor Holmes.
Much of the correspondence I've gotten states that if this project is approved, we're going to see more crime. Well, if we're going to see more crime, why don't we have a gate in there, keep people out that don't belong in there? I mean, it just makes sense to have a gated community if this project moves forward.
And just to comment on what you've just brought up, Supervisor, isn't there a substation not the other exit down within, 3 or 4 minutes from this development? Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so folks that move here have a choice. They can go to the church or they can go to jail.
And the church is taking a neutral position
Right.
on this.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Any other questions or comments from the board before I open the public hearing and open it up? All right, seeing none. This is a public hearing, so at this time, what I am going to do is open this up for public testimony. We do have a list of individuals who have indicated that they want to speak. So far, I have 60 names. Yeah, it's going to be a long day. We will start with Bobby Uppel. He's actually number 2 on the list, but he is apparently swapped with number 1. And just as a reminder, if you're speaking for a group, you have 5 minutes. If you are speaking as an individual, you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk, Madam Chairperson, Supervisors of the Board. My name is Bobby Appel, and I represent Stop 150 Apartments, and am opposed to the project for various reasons. One of the questions discussed or just raised by Supervisor Montgomery is, what if we take those structures that are 2-story and take them to a 1-story? We found from the applicant that's not actually a feasible event. I would actually argue against that point. Though I am a neighbor of the project, I'm completely opposed to the project, but this is about more than just how it affects me. It's about how it affects our community plan, and what we want for our children and for people that live in the area. So I have a couple of points that I want to address. Number 1 is the issue raised about the substantial benefits to the community. We are all aware of the letter from Michael Johnson back in 2007 where he denied this project on the grounds that it did not provide any substantial benefit. Though a substantial benefit is not required by the board or by the Planning Commission, he felt it necessary to raise that particular point in his letter. So my question would be is this: if it was important in 2007 that there was substantial benefit to the community, what changed in 2012? And maybe perhaps later on he could address that point. I'd also like to address the issues about substantial benefit to the community raised in terms of number of jobs, construction jobs, what it costs the community, the $2.3 million worth of revenue that's supposed to be raised and supposed to be of value to us. Well, first of all, there are only 2 jobs that are proposed to come out of this, apart from the initial construction. And we don't know whether those jobs are going to be local jobs or whether they are going to be from an out-of-town developer or an out-of-town construction company. But there are only 2 maintenance jobs that are prevailed or have been noted in the EIR that will be given back to the community. Number 2, if there is any economic benefit to the 6 businesses that were noted by the applicant, there will be a substantial cost to all the residents of Placer County in terms of their own financial impact reports. And from my readings, that came up to millions and millions of dollars over the course of the lifetime of the project. How is that a fair calculation or a fair swap in terms of benefits? Second of all, we talked mainly about the definition of density and the designation of the Penryn Parkway. Well, having studied the Parkway in quite some detail and spent a lot of time researching the community plan and going over the fine print, I came to the following conclusions. The land use designation of Penryn Parkway does not specify an allowable density or establish minimum or maximum lot sizes. Therefore, density is generally determined by the zoning designation. When there is a conflict between what density and the zoning and the community plan allow, clarifying the issue is very important, as the County Code in 17.02.050D.2 quite clearly states that when there is a conflict between zoning and community plan, the community plan prevails. We've gone over this argument on several occasions about, as Supervisor Euler has brought up, that has been zoned this particular way for 13 to 18 years now. It is irrelevant since the community plan quite clearly states that this is a low-density area and not a medium or high-density area.
And Bobby, I'm going to give you 2 more minutes because you're speaking on behalf of the Stop 150 apartments, but after this, everyone will get 3.
Okay.
So, thank you.
The only place the Penryn Parkway is mentioned in the community plan. The parkway is set aside in the plan as a special area with flexibility intended to allow creativity in developing the area as a commercial core. The area residents and highway travelers, however, the plan never exempts the parkway from any goals and policies in the plan, but additional goals and policies are given to bound the flexibility provided for by the parkway. The Horseshoe Bar Penryn Community Plan is very specific about the allowed density in Penryn Parkway. While the requirement of relatively low density in the parkway development policies is not precise, part of the purposeful flexibility for the parkway, the intended density is clear that the context of the whole plan. The plan defines low density as no more than 2.5 dwellings per acre, medium density at 2.4, and high density between 4 and 10. These residential density definitions are consistent with those in the general plan as well as the surrounding communities. My point being is that though there is ambiguity over the levels of density, the plan clearly states what was intended and what is expected in that land use area. This project is clearly inconsistent with the local community, with the plan, and the Horseshoe Bar plan. And I would ask that you would deny this project as it is proposed today, and perhaps send it back for further revision. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. What I'm going to ask people to do, since I actually have names and numbers, is I'm going to read off names, and if you would just come forward and make a line in the order. Next would be Gordon Robbins, followed by Robin King, Tracy, I believe it's Whitley, Phil Barger, Sondra Faser, and I apologize if I'm murdering people's names here, Eric Bull, Muriel Davis, Linda Williams, and then Kim Gazoniga. That will be our first 10. Thank you.
I'm representing a few neighbors that could not make it, so if I could have just a little bit over the 3.
Well, unfortunately, they're not an officially recognized group, so you're going to be limited to 3.
Okay. I need to address something that Kirk said earlier, clarify. Oh, Gordon Robbins, as she said. Okay. Those are policies, and they are mandatory when they talk about the relatively low density. Those are not guidelines. Okay. The term is shall. It's been alleged, as you've heard, that the term relatively low density used in the Penryn Parkway development policies is defined by the rest of the paragraph, signing, lighting, building, etc., building height. Perhaps density is being confused with intensity, which is not the same. Density is an amount of something within an area or volume. In the 75 other places the community plan uses the terms density or densities, none, 0, have anything to do with signing, lighting, building height, or architectural style. One deals with mosquitoes, one with plants, one with drainage features, one with sewage. Every other application deals with dwellings or population per area. Relatively low density is talking about dwelling or population density in that application. It's also been claimed that the parkway is so separate that it is only subject to the goals and policies specifically cited for it, not the other goals and policies in the plan. It is almost like saying the parkway is a separate country or a tribal gaming land. Then, springboarding off that, it is stated the density definitions are not applicable to understanding what relatively low density is. In the 50 times the plan uses the term Penryn Parkway, there is absolutely no inference that the parkway is exempt from the goals and policies of the plan. And to the contrary, throughout the plan, the parkway is shown to be an integral subset of the plan area, focused on providing a commercial core for local residents and visitors, as you've heard. For example, when talking about high-density residential, which the project is, it states, and I quote, "The HDR designation is provided in only one location, and I emphasize, within the plan area," unquote. And it's speaking about that mobile home park you heard about earlier. The parkway is definitely within the plan area, and thus is not to have any high-density residential. The parkway was intended, as you've heard, to be flexible, so it would allow creative planning to, quotes, reach the development potential for the benefit of the local community as well as visitors. However, that does not exempt it from all the other requirements in the plan. The people who helped write the community plan and the plan itself, when you read it very thoroughly, make very clear that the Parkway, while a special area within the plan, is intended to be a fully integral part and subject to all the requirements. The definitions of density throughout the plan do define density range intended by the term relatively low density. In the most liberal interpretation, that density cannot exceed, as you've heard, 4 dwellings per acre. This area was named Penryn Parkway because it was envisioned to be a broad, scenic thoroughfare with an attractive entrance to the community, not a blight like you see in North Highlands and Antelope. I ask that you please deny this misfit project as proposed.
Thank you, Mr. Robbins. Robin King? Followed by Tracy Whitley after Robin. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the board. I appreciate this opportunity to come before you and speak on behalf of myself and my family. My father owns Birmingham Signs, and we operate our business out of our home on Penryn Estates Drive. I think we all know we can't stand in the way of progress, and that's not our motive in protesting this. We're well aware that development of this precious land is most likely inevitable. However, I believe it can and must be developed responsibly. This project is not progress for our community. I can't add to what's been given here. Only thank the citizens and officials that have done extensive research and thank them for their tireless efforts invested on behalf of all of us. You've heard the facts as to the negative and sudden impact of this overdevelopment on our beautiful rural community. We ask you to consider what is more valuable here, the enticement of this larger-than-life proposition, or the concerns and opinions expressed by the people whose lives will be directly impacted by the decision made here today. I can only make my plea to you that you listen to the voices of the people who have voted for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Tracy Whitley.
Yes, thank you. My name is Tracy Whitley. I live at 7350 Secret Ravine Road. I have lived in that on that street since 1995. Shortly after I moved here, I happened to hear about another development that was going to be happening on another riparian land just south of 80, and that was the Indian Casino. After 2 years and fighting very hard, that got moved to a more appropriate industrial location in Lincoln. This is another land use issue. This is another riparian location that is being put in an inappropriate location. It's surrounded by low-density housing. No other place in the whole area do you see high-density housing being placed right in the middle of low-density housing. I'm sorry. I have worked with the Sacramento County. I work with the Sacramento County. I'm a traffic engineer. And I work with communities. I work with neighborhood communities that are trying to deal with all the traffic implications that have occurred from decades of poor planning decisions that have happened within the Sacramento County. And so I know what kind of traffic impacts happen when you don't have proper arterials to support this kind of high-density housing. I also have kids that attend Del Oro High School that are going to have to be walking on the roads. I don't see where the traffic issues have been mitigated here. We have no shoulders, we have no bike lanes, we have blind hills, not just on the north side of the freeway, but on the south side as well. I don't run on that street. It's not safe. We've had a couple of fatals that have occurred on these streets, both on King Road, just near the park. A pedestrian was hit, and also we've had a fatal at the curve at Penryn Road. These are issues. I mean, I deal with collision histories all the time over in Sacramento County, and we are always trying to mitigate these issues after the fact. So unless there is some kind of mitigation to make these more user-friendly for a walkable community, I don't see where putting a high-density home in such an area is going to work for the community, let alone walking all the pedestrian traffic that actually uses the town of Loomis. If you've ever walked through there, there is kids walking from the high school in that town, kids trying to cross the street in a very highly congested area. It's kind of landlocked between a freeway and a railroad track. So there's really no place to put extra capacity through that town. So where are they going to go? They're going to come down Penryn. They're going to go to King. They're going to do anything but try to go through the town of Loomis, which is already heavily impacted. You put 1,000 more cars going down that street, and you are asking for trouble. You are asking for kids to get hit that are trying to access all the businesses down there, the ice cream shop.
If I could ask you to wrap up, please.
Okay. So those are my issues. It's all about, planning it properly. You need to look at this as developing a usable community, a green community. Plopping in a high-density house in the middle of a rural area is not a proper use of land.
Thank you. Phil Barger, followed by Sandra Fraser and Eric Bull.
I'm Phil Barger. I lived in the community 39 years. In 87, I sat on the input committee for the master plan for the growth of Penryn area. We found that putting in apartments was not needed. And I can cite today that we had an approval 5 years ago on 3 acres of 23 homes in there on 3 acres. That has not been built. It's still set there. I think you extended it automatically. Still set there. They got it up for commercial. Secondly, the other orchard thing down along the road there by the service station, they have only built 1/3 of what was authorized. There is no need for 150 apartments in this community. It's very high density and is of no benefit to our community. So, we have looked at this, and I'm sorry, I forgot my glasses, so I'm trying to leave it with magnifying glass. But anyway, we have majority of our members in the community is against this, and the MAC committee unanimously voted against this plan, and they're the input to the supervisor of what should be done. So we need to ignore this. I'm having to speak now without my notes. We need to ignore this building, this orchard plan. And because we have the views of this community, majority of them, and the MAC committee of not applying to this, we need to listen to our community, that there is no benefit to this. You build 150 or allow 150 new apartments in there, and we haven't built what has been authorized before. We have no need for this. Listen to your community. Listen to the people who are here objecting to it. We don't have a need for this. There is no benefit to the community for this plan. I urge you not to approve this plan.
Thank you, sir. Sandra Fraser, followed by Eric Bull and Muriel Davis. No Eric? Okay. Looks like Muriel. Welcome. Oh, wait. Oh, I'm sorry, Sandra.
Madam Chair and members, my name is Sandra Fraser. I live at 2750 Taylor Road, Penryn. First, I want to make sure it's clear I'm not opposed to growth. I've only been here a year and a half. Without growth, I wouldn't be lucky enough to be here. But I live in a 4-housing area built to fit the plan. So, the project objectives developed by the applicant are too narrow to allow an adequate evaluation of alternatives. The objective of 150 residences drives the evaluation of possible alternatives. And when objectives are too narrowly defined like these, only the proposed project sounds workable. The courts have ruled this is unacceptable. For example, in Preservation Council versus the City of San Jose, the Supreme Court stated, the project objectives in the DEIR appear unnecessarily restrictive and inflexible. In that case, the desired size of the building was included in the objectives. The court went on to say, due to the narrowness of project objectives, mitigating the adverse impact of the proposed project by such means as alternative project designs was impermissibly constrained. That is exactly what this plan does with the objective of 150 apartments. There are very practical alternatives that would virtually eliminate all of the significant impacts. They are at a lower density, one which complies with the community plan. I humbly request that you deny the project as proposed, as it damages the existing community, violates the community plan. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll hear from Eric Bull, then Muriel Davis, followed by Linda Williams, Kim Gazanaga, Ingrid Rice, Diane Barger, Cheryl Dove, and Barbara Taylor. So if you hear your name, just line up behind the podium here. Thank you very much.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Eric Bull. I live at 2763 Penryn Road, just down from the project site. I'm a fairly new resident to the area. I've been here about 3 years, my family and I. And I'm here to reiterate what's been said by a number of folks, Bobby Opal and others that will follow me, to look at what the community plan says. So I moved into the community. I like the idea of community, and what we have here is a community voice. There's been a lot of references made to the community plan, even to the fact of what the community wants as far as looking at the Gold Rush architecture. So I encourage you to listen to the community voice that's represented here. And one of the elements is in the conversation, the conflict between the zoning and the community plan, where it cites that the community plan prevails. And that's kind of a lot of argument you're going to be hearing here. It's not against nothing going in, but it's to say that we want the community plan to be upheld. We want the community plan and the community voice to be heard. So when we look at the community plan defining low density as 2.5 dwellings per acre, up to a medium density of about 4 dwellings per acre, that's the voice that we want to put out there, that we want you to hear, that we want you to listen to, that we want you to consider. And as a side note, as being a resident on Penryn Road, the question came up about bus service. There is no bus that goes down Penryn Road. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bull. Muriel Davis, followed by Linda Williams and Kim Gazanaga.
Hi, I'm Muriel Davis. I have something I wrote, so I can just read it to you. The Horseshoe Bar Penryn Community Plan states that the Penryn Parkway is to be a commercial and retail area for the community and for travelers. Projects like the new Loomis Basin Equine Clinic is exactly the kind of commercial business that the Horseshoe Bar Community Plan states will benefit both the local community and the neighboring communities, and continues the goal to localize commercial in the Penryn Parkway, rather than having its helter-skelter throughout the community. This project is inconsistent with our community plan. The north end of the Penryn Road has 2.3 plus rural residential agricultural estates. These estates, because they're rural agriculture, can't have animals. These follow the guidelines of the community plan, and we're required to keep many trees and riparian areas untouched, whereas these property owners protect the trees in the areas, while this project is allowed to destroy many trees, including the blue oaks and the riparian areas. They changed it to save one squirrel, but there's a lot more that's being destroyed. The Penryn Parkway was established in the community plan with goals to preserve the natural resources in the design of any project and to keep the density relatively low in order to protect the trees like the endangered blue oaks and the riparian areas and the rural environment. To put a high-density housing project adjacent to the rural residential estate shows inconsistency in the planning of the Penryn Parkway. The county seems to insist on putting high-density housing projects in the Penryn area. In the staff report for the Planning Commission was a statement, this density is in keeping with the intention of the project applicant and the county to develop multifamily housing in the Penryn Parkway area. What? The county approved the community plan, and the county should be supporting the community plan's goal to have the commercial area localized in the Penryn Parkway and support the goals of the community plan to protect the rural and unique environment of the area. The low-density project alternatives in the EIR were inadequately evaluated, even though the lower density was environmentally superior, I'm sorry, I'm nervous, and would lessen the impact on the community. It was rejected because the developer would make less money. Are the developer's return on costs more important than the impact to the local community? This project is inconsistent in the area and detrimental to the health, safety, and the welfare of the people residing and working in the neighborhood in this area. We ask that you, the supervisors, vote for our appeal and reject the project as proposed with the high density of 10 units per acre. Also, I wanted, if I have a moment of time, I wanted to include the fact that in the cumulative impact section, chapter 14, they neglected to mention the Penryn townhomes, the Penryn Boynton project on Boynton, and the shopping center on 80, and the traffic impacts from those. Even they aren't even finished, and that was not included. To me, that invalidates the EIR. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Linda Williams, followed by Kim Gazaniga, Ingrid Rice, Diane Barger, Cheryl Dove, and Barbara Taylor.
I am Linda Williams. My husband and I have lived in Penryn for 30-plus years, and we, as well, did not expect that it would never change. We understand that there has to be progress. We are just hoping for well-planned, well-thought-out progress. And since public speaking comes right just above getting a root canal, I'm going to read what I wrote. Do any of you, all of you, recognize this booklet? It's published by the Placer County Visitors Bureau and also is contained on the Placer County website. On page 58, the article on Penryn and Newcastle says, there is a small town charm in these foothill communities. Their location allows the residents the opportunity to enjoy the peacefulness of the country. On page 54, the article on Loomis says, Loomis is a true example of an old-fashioned small town that has a friendly, slower pace. It goes on. Though South Placer County is one of the state's fastest-growing areas, Loomis and the surrounding area has been able to maintain its rural atmosphere and keep growth to a minimum. If you allow this out-of-town developer from San Diego to dramatically increase the local population with renting transients, they will destroy the elements that our county touts as attracting people. And interestingly enough, I was looking at demographics and population on the internet, and several places it said that Penryn, according to the 2010 census, has 803 people. 200 of those are here today in opposition. It does go on some other sites to say that there are 2,036 people, even though on the freeway there's a sign that says we're 5,000, which is, I don't know who's right. I would think the census had some sort of information that led them to that. But what I'm trying to say is that we are a large majority, those of us who are here today. And if you use the 800, you're talking about making a 50% increase in our population with this project, because they're estimating something like 425 people. If you allow this development, which goes against the plan, the spirit, and the will of the residents of the area, you will then need to erase those statements from this advertising, for they won't be true of Penryn and Loomis. So I plead with you to listen with an open heart to this community, to these constituents who elected you, and ask you to use the good judgment that we expect from you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Appreciate that. Kim Gazoniga, Ingrid Rice, followed by Diane Barger, Cheryl Dove, Barbara Taylor, Ron Martinez, Donna, oh gosh, I can't read it, Delno, I think it says, Lisa Butler, and Brad Fisher. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Kim Gazaniga, and I live at 1760 English Colony Way in Penryn. I am here as a Penryn resident and an environmental scientist. I have experience in the CEQA process, and I'm here to highlight a discrepancy in the hazardous materials section of the EIR. DDT, arsenic, and lead are present on site. All are detrimental to the human health and the environment. The proposed project site was once an orchard, and these chemicals are a result of this past use. The project proponent understood the contamination and voluntarily entered into an agreement with the Department of Toxic Substances Control, or DTSC, to assess the extent of the contamination with the goal of developing a cleanup plan that would allow DTSC to certify the project as clean and require no further action once the plan was completed. The final version of this plan, known as the Removal Action Work Plan, or RAW, is now included in the final EIR as Appendix C. There is a discrepancy between the RAW and the final EIR. The final EIR states that one of the RAW objectives is to obtain certification from DTSC for unrestricted land use. This would be accomplished through the excavation and off-site disposal of contaminated soil. No contaminated soil would remain on site. DTSC would certify the project site as clean, and no restrictions would apply to land use. But the final EIR also states, quote, DTSC standards do not require complete remediation of the site, but any portion of the site where contaminated soil is not remediated would not be available for residential use, unquote. In other words, the project proponent can leave the contamination in place. To do this, DTSC would need to implement a deed restriction to limit the use. No deed restriction has been put into place. DTSC suggested a deed restriction in response to the comment letter B, but it was not incorporated into the final revisions or included as a mitigation measure for hazardous material impacts. And this, I see, as potentially requiring the recirculation of the EIR. If a decision is made to not recirculate the EIR, it must be supported by substantial evidence in the administrative record, according to CEQA Guideline 15088.5E. So I think it's your time, Board of Supervisors, to use your judgment. We know that DDT, arsenic, and lead is present, and so does the project proponent. Plans indicate cleanup for unrestricted use, but as written, the EIR fails to confirm this. Thanks.
Thank you. Ingrid Rice?
Hi. Ingrid Rice, and I live on 2700 Taylor Road. I was reminded this morning that you are my elected officials, and I'm reminded how grateful I am that you have kept our community and watched out for our community and protected it and kept it a small community. I moved here from Antelope, and 20 years ago it was a rural area. We had, it was more like Penryn is now. We stayed there many years. The apartments moved in. When the apartments moved in, the crime rate went up. We used to keep things on our lawn, then they were gone. Then we ended up putting metal gates on our doors. And the helicopter noise from the police was almost every night over, and we weren't even right on by the apartments. We were back in further in the community. But it affected not just the people on the street, it affected the whole community. So what I'm asking you today, not to be lulled by dollar signs or anything else, but hear the cry of our community. We want the demographics to stay. We are like a slice of apple pie. I mean, Penryn, if you visit the elementary school and you visit the high schools, this is a unique part of the country, and it produces many strong people that affect the nation, doctors and nurses, and I'm asking you to preserve that. Thank you.
Thank you. Diane Barger, I believe, is next.
Yeah, I'm Diane Barger, and I live on 7995 Logan Lane, Penryn. My family came to California in 1848 with fruit trees. And then later on, one of my grandfathers had pear orchards over on Rattlesnake Bar. And unfortunately, there was a pear blight and the depression, and he ended up selling and returned to their home part in Santa Rosa. My husband was in the Air Force, and he retired in California. I was delighted. And we looked for a home, and we looked from Yuba City to Roseville, almost to Auburn, all around the area, and found our perfect home in Penryn. And it was a place where our 6 children had horses, goats, pigs, sheep, chickens, dogs, cats, what have you. They did the 4-H and the FFA experience, all of them. And I just hate to see this rural atmosphere going the way of apartments. You know, you're opening a Pandora's box with this 150. There are all kinds of places that are greedy for money and development. And if this one goes through, they're all going to want the apartments because you gave it to the orchards. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will move to Cheryl Dove, Barbara Taylor, Ron Martinez, Donna Delno, Lisa Butler, Brad Fisher, Shauna Westfall, and Claudia Starkey. And just as a heads up, that is probably going to be the extent of the comments we can get to today, because as I indicated earlier, unfortunately there is a 2:30 meeting scheduled for this chambers that we are not able to bump because it has been publicly noticed. What we would do, and I'm just checking with my fellow supervisors, is continue this meeting to a future date where everyone would be able to come back. We would be able to continue with the public comment, take all the comments, and then make a decision on both sets of appeals and the EIR. And I apologize abjectly for the inconvenience that this is to many of you, but unfortunately we do have this scheduling conflict. Supervisor Duran, if you could just see if you have time available on that date. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Board of Supervisors. My name is Cheryl Dove. I live at 3705 DeLapp Place in Loomis. And what I wanted to say is that I really appreciate your taking into consideration as an executive board a preponderance of all the evidence that's been brought to you and looking at the appeals. I think there's been a lot of issues raised here today relative to making a decision process. And I think if you really look at those issues relative to the economics and the highest and best use of that particular parcel of land. I think what you really want to do is you want to look at it not only from the community-based perspective, but an economic perspective, and say, is there some way that we can utilize that land in another fashion to actually generate some income out of it? And I think that perhaps from a fiscal and economic impact perspective, that needs to be looked at in a little bit more depth to offset any of the other expenses to the county. I mean, we're all looking at situations where the property values have gone down, and we know that a lot of the income streams have gone down to the county. We're not saying that we want to stop economic growth. We're certainly not saying we don't want the parcel development. We're just saying please look at the highest and best economic use. The other issue is relative to the amount of questions that have been raised relative to the environmental impact report and the specific items that have been brought up. Even the lady that was just here in line was talking about the hazardous waste impact. And, you know, as rural people, we're certainly aware of what's happened with, you know, the DDT and all the rest of it and the way we did our farming practices and our fruit orchard practices in the past. That has to be taken into account. There are also issues relative to the 100-year floodplain. There's issues relative to density being equated with the 2-story versus the 1-story. There's a lot of issues that have not been resolved as yet and definitely warrant a relook and a reissuance of the EIR. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Barbara Taylor, Ron Martinez, Donna Delno, Lisa Butler.
Hi, I'm Barbara Taylor. I live at 7259 Quarry Lane in Penryn. My husband and I moved to Penryn with our special needs daughter 2 years ago this month. And one of the big draws here was the beauty, the ruralness, the sense of community. And we are just so dismayed that this development is being proposed. I understand it's in conflict with our HBPCP codes as far as density for dwellings, no more than 4 dwellings per acre. But the other thing that just, really hurts me so much is when I drive down Penryn and they're speaking about retaining some boulders. For me, I just can't understand the reason of decimating 15 acres of beautiful mature trees, vegetation, our unique native plants, and just the impact on the local wildlife. I have an orchard, and I'm totally blessed with it, and I donate 100% of everything I produce to families in need in Placer County. And when I think about the odds of just destroying this beautiful rural community, it hurts more than I can tell you. To inundate our country roads is a concern because my special needs daughter loves to walk her therapy miniature horse down the roads. It's part of her therapy and getting out and so forth. But with this type of traffic that's going to emanate from this development, I would fear for her life, okay? Even though we have a lovely equine center going in for caring for our horses, there's no way I could allow her to walk her horse down there for treatment or whatever. The other thing, too, is the roads. That type of traffic, we have no bike lanes. They discussed that there was an option for students to walk or bike. Taylor Road is 50 miles an hour. There's no room for error. There's just this horrible concern of a tragedy happening. The other thing, too, is Penryn only has a volunteer fire department. Okay? We don't even have our own law enforcement agency. We are just a small town, small community. And I am just pleading that you all reconsider how this project will destroy our magnificent community and ask that you deny the project as it's been presented. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Ron Martinez, Donna Delno, Lisa Butler.
Madam Chair, members of the board, my name is Ron Martinez. I live at 2332 Linwood Lane in Penryn. I first want to thank you for your patience and tolerance and commend you for your professionalism today. Not only you as elected members, but the members of the planning department and council as well. I don't envy you the task, but I'm here to urge you on behalf of the people here today to reconsider this request for development. I respect private property rights, and I understand the need and the opportunity that this country was built upon for individuals to invest and take every opportunity for success. However, I think there are issues here that have been raised before you. I don't want to reiterate them, but there are some things that I do have expertise in that I'd like to clarify. My background is I have 35 years of education, most of it is in administration here in Placer County. And Supervisor Duran and Holmes, I know that you both were involved with school boards, and $5,000 was the ADA rate some time ago. Frankly, it's gone up. I checked as I sat, it's $6,441 at the Loomis Unified School District right now. Of that $6,400, about $4,500 goes to any particular school site, the difference being absorbed at district administration. That's significant funding. However, understand that the cost of operating schools continues to escalate as these supplemental funds that used to be available when you were involved in education are going away. And that may seem like a lot of money when you total that times the number of students that could impact either the elementary school district, which, by the way, there is no junior high school. Penryn Elementary is a K-8. I would challenge you to investigate or at least bring into discussion the superintendents of both the Loomis Unified School District and the Placer High School District. I have had a discussion with Dave Horsey, who's the superintendent of the Placer High School District. Del Oro High School currently has approximately 1,700 students. It is beyond capacity. They are having a challenge right now. They are not a declining enrollment district. Those schools that are in that district, the high school district specifically, are experiencing growth. And Del Oro specifically has a challenge because they have more students than they have capacity for. Bringing in additional students is a challenge. And yes, there are mitigation fees, but they're not significant enough to maintain the infrastructure and build the infrastructure that's necessary to educate our students to the level that we would like to have them educated in this county. So I would encourage you to have that discussion, hear from those experts, hear from the leadership, and get their perspective on the potential impact that these additional students would bring. Again, I urge you to reconsider this project, to deny the EIR, and to accept the appeal, as you've heard from everyone else. From the MAC, I used to say when I was in administration, and I tolerate this, if you will, you can do things right or you can do the right thing. You've got expertise here and testimony both supporting and against this development, claiming that their approach on either side is correct or legal or acceptable.
Ron, if you wouldn't mind wrapping up, I'm sorry.
Okay. My wrap-up is do the right thing and support the people that are here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Donna Delno, Lisa Butler, Brad Fisher, Shauna Westfall, and Claudia Starkey.
Before you start the timer, I talked to Vice President Lundberg yesterday. He has 1,710 kids, and there are about 300 kids that are transfers. So people are coming in, moving here, getting here, and that may be why they want to bring the project here, is because we have the good schools, but they are over capacity, and again, a lot more transfers have come on.
Okay, now let the timer begin.
My name is Donna Delno. I'm a resident of Penryn, wife and mother of two kids, one at Del Oro, one at Penryn Elementary. We moved to Penryn 12 years ago to raise our family in the country, our American dream. I was the lead for the Penryn Elementary Playground Committee. Over a 5-year period, we worked very hard to privately raise $111,000 to fund our new playground at Penryn School. for the kids to enjoy since there was no other playground or park made for kids in Penryn. Thanks to the many volunteers, and several are here with us, we are proud to have had the Loomis Union School District install the playground. My goal was to better the life for the kids and the families of Penryn. Our town is based on community, families, farms, and ranching, not apartments and renters that will not be vested into our community since they would be temporary residents. I wanted to know how many calls and letters has the county received to request apartments in Penryn, and then how many letters and calls have you received opposing the project? I'm sure there may have been a few people looking for apartments in Penryn, but Ruth Alves was not able to give me the answer. She said she had an overwhelming response opposing. But my question was, why does one out-of-town developer have the right to change the daily lives of the 2,200 residents of Penryn? It's completely about money, and it's not fair to us. If we're taxpayers and residents of Penryn, I think we should have the say on how that goes. A little bit done here. The EIR for the orchard has a glaring omission. There is no mention of the massive Rockland crossings now under construction 3.6 miles away from the orchard on Sierra College. The shopping center includes Walmart, Home Depot, and another 15,000 cars a day coming through our little towns. The EIR did not mention the improved Lifehouse Church on Sierra College in Loomis. There is no mention of the Turkey Creek 393 homes that have been approved up at Sierra College and 193. Penryn is not the place for any more developments. They need to move any future developments to infrastructure where the jobs are and the roads that can handle the huge traffic numbers that come through and with these developments. The use of Boynton Road was also omitted from the EIR you referenced and said it would be an alternative route to and from Del Oro from the orchard. And also omitted from the EIR was the 108 businesses on Swetzer Road Business Park, along with about 800 cars, this is my guess, and delivery trucks going into work 6:37, coming out for lunch, going back in for lunch, coming out, and then leaving between 3:30 and 6:30 every night. Penryn only has 5 or 6 roads going through it. We have English Colony, Humphrey, Taylor, Colwell, I can't remember it now because I'm too nervous, but we only have 5 or 6 roads. So when you've got, let me stay on my reading here. We only have 5 or 6 roads, with Swetzer being one of the main routes to get out of Penryn. The vision for the community plan was not high-density housing and thousands of cars. Is that because that other minute, did I get that minute?
No, we gave you that one free.
You did? Okay,
Yeah.
So do I get one more minute? Because I'm...
Just if you could wrap up,
I will
please.
go as fast as I can.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Let's see, I'll skip one part. Okay, so from August 1st to October 9th, there were 41 crimes in Loomis and Penryn. There were 2 rapes in the last 3 weeks, several car thefts. There's been burglaries, commercial burglaries, drugs, and even a 1 a.m. shooting into the Shell gas station. Last night on Fox 40 News, there was a big marijuana bust on King, where the guys went in, robbed the medical marijuana, and then shot through the house. The Loomis-Penryn crime has climbed to an unacceptable level and needs to be controlled and stopped before any more people can be brought in here. I brought a list
Lisa,
of the crimes.
I'm going to suggest that since you have this in writing, I'm going to cut you off on time because we
Okay.
really need to finish up with the folks behind you.
Okay.
If you could submit that to the clerk of the board, she'll make sure we get copies of that, including the crime statistics.
My wrap-up was, we do not want this to come to Penryn. We've got enough going on right now, and we want to preserve our rural heritage.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, Donna. Lisa. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. See, if I don't follow my notes, I don't keep on track either.
Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Butler, and I'm a homeowner in Loomis and a parent of children at Del Oro. I moved here quite a few years ago from a big city craving the atmosphere of a small town. If these 150 proposed apartments are built in Penryn and down the street from our high school, it will destroy the rural atmosphere of our town. If all the trees are cut down, where will all of the current occupants live that beautify our town, the wildlife? I understand that the developers being located in San Diego may not understand this, but we are passionate about it. That's why we live here, not San Diego. This project would have an enormous environmental impact, bringing with it traffic congestion, noise, air pollution, crime, more taxes for the homeowners, All the reasons why we don't live in a big city. Without offense, it is a proven statistic that the cluster renters bring in more crime than homeowners. If this plan moves forward, so will several more projects, turning rural Taylor Road into an attractive apartment alley. The location provides a dangerous exit and entry. Our schools may become overpopulated, and our well-educated children and their futures could suffer tremendously. The school impact spoken of earlier is only of the first project. We would need more resources, and we already have limited resources. We nearly lost our fire department a couple of years back due to lack of funding, and the homeowners of our town fought to keep them by way of voting to pay extra taxes. If you build 150 apartments, our resources will be less available to the people who pay for those services, our community. I realize that I live in Loomis and the proposed project is in Penryn, but here's the deal. The small towns of Over, Newcastle, Penryn, and Loomis all have children that go to our renowned high school, Delaware High. So when you mess with one of our towns, you're pretty much messing with all the rest of us. We, as a community, our parents, students, and family members of all sorts, are proud of our accomplishments and reputation of our school. Yes, we have a few problems. We are human, but we do not welcome more problems. We as parents are working hard to raise our children into successful adults. We don't welcome anything that has potential to make that job any more difficult than it already is in this day and age. I believe this project will do just that. I believe this project will bring in more drugs, more crime, more taxes for the homeowners, as well as fight against our morals and what we live here for, the atmosphere of a small town. It could destroy our reputation. Small towns do not have large apartment complexes. It is just that simple. It just doesn't fit, and we just don't want it. It would look ridiculous. Density codes are not being followed. When you arrive into Loomis, on the tall release sign, there is a smaller sign just below it with a powerful message that we live by. It reads, "A small town is like a big family." If this project moves forward, we may have to take that sign down because that message will be lost. There will be a hole in our hearts that will last forever. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we're going to go Brad Fisher, Shauna Westfall, and Claudia Starkey.
Hi, my name is Brad Fisher. I stand here as a K-8 Penryn graduate, a Delaware graduate, and a Sierra College student. I want to first start off with some statistics. According to the Sacramento State Environmental Health and Safety Department, it states that the Sacramento region is designated as a severe ozone non-attainment area by the U.S. EPA. This non-attainment area includes all of Sacramento County and parts of El Dorado, Placer, Solano, Sutter, and Yolo counties. During the summer, the region fails to meet both the state and federal health-based standards for ozone. Because the Sacramento Valley is shaped like a bowl, smog presents a critical problem in the summer when an inversion layer traps pollutants close to the ground, causing unhealthy air quality levels. Vehicles and other mobile sources cause about 70% of this region's air pollution problem. Ground-level ozone forms readily in the atmosphere during hot summer weather, but is not emitted directly into the air. It is formed when volatile organic compounds, VOCs, and oxides of nitrogen, NOx, go through a photochemical reaction in the presence of sunlight. VOCs come from things like evaporate, like gasoline, paint fumes, lighter fluid, and consumer products. NOx is emitted from motor vehicles, power plants, and other sources of combustion like gas-powered lawn and gardening equipment. Sacramento ranked the 5th most polluted city in the nation according to the American Lung Association State of Air 2010 report released Wednesday, April 28, 2010. For the Sacramento Valley Air Basin, Butte, Placer, Sacramento, Shasta, Solano, Sutter, Tehama, Yolo, and Yuba counties all received failing grades for high ozone days. Placer County was the 11th most ozone polluted in the United States out of 3,140 counties in the United States. The primary source of the valley's pollution is from cars and trucks. The fact is that the apartments will introduce at least 150, that's saying if there's only one person with one car, up to 600, 1,000 new cars. It will congest our streets, our schools, and cost our air quality to be unhealthier in one of the smallest, if not the smallest town in Placer County. For someone like me who has asthma, this is dangerous, if not deadly. Penryn is actually so small that looking at the Placer County website, you guys don't even mention us as a town. We're not even mentioned. Placer County may not think we're big enough to be put on your website or even a big deal, but I'm here to tell you differently. Penryn is the greatest town that Placer County has. We've got the Griffith Quarry that built some of the greatest cities that California has. We have some of the most vast amounts of historic mandarin orchards, which are real orchards, and the best elementary school in this county that this county has to offer, Penryn. Penryn is here today to tell you that the 150 apartments is not what we want. We want to stay the same small, great town that we've always been. Appeal the apartments, protect our town and our health. Thank you.
And Brad, I have to say you must have ESP or something, because the meeting that is bumping us from this room is the Air Pollution Control District meeting at 2:30. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, Shauna Westfall and Claudia Starkey. Seeing no Shauna, we'll move directly to Claudia. Oh, is there a Shauna?
I don't know. I'm Claudia.
All right, Claudia, come on forward.
All right. I'm Claudia Starkey. I've lived in Penryn for 35 years. As you may have gathered, the orchard at Penryn is a proposal without a friend. The only person who would say anything nice about it at the Planning Commission meeting was a neighbor who expects to gain financially by selling his property for similar exploitation. Our Penryn MAC meeting regarding this project did not attract the usual 8 to 10 participants. Suddenly, more than 100 community members packed the hall. We were all limited to just 3 minutes to voice our objections. After more than 2 hours of testimony, citizens were asked only to say which previous speaker or on which talking points they agreed, just so we could eventually finish the meeting. Then the MAC did something I have not experienced in 12 years. They unanimously voted against the Orchards project. You have attended a lot of MAC meetings, and I'm sure you know that MACs are not bastions of unanimity. Heck, even the Bickford Ranch project had some supporters. But you should not deny this project solely because a stunning number of Penryn and Loomis residents revile it. The construction phase would involve wholesale environmental destruction, removal of trees, leveling of land. The project would present numerous unavoidable problems in traffic, air pollution, school overcrowding, related to all those additional people in 150 apartments. The most important reason you should reject this project is the Horseshoe Bar Penryn Community Plan. Our plan, written and adopted in 1994, had a primary goal of maintaining the unique and rural character of the area. This was not a casual goal. According to the Horseshoe Bar Penryn Community Plan, a low density or even a medium density would yield on a 15-acre parcel a maximum of 60 units. The outrageous request of 10 units per acre, 150 family apartments, should not even be momentarily entertained. Placer County's zoning ordinance provides that when there is a conflict between the community plan and the zoning, the community plan must prevail. We request and expect that the Board of Supervisors will uphold the Penryn community's established legal right to determine the amount and direction of development in our small part of Placer County. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. I'm going to give Shauna Westfall one more opportunity, if she's just here and being shy. Okay. As I indicated, we do have a meeting in here at 2:30. They need to get in here at 2 o'clock to set up, so I am going to ask my board to continue this public hearing. It will remain open, which is a little awkward, but what we'll do is I'm going to ask the board to continue the public hearing to November 6th, which is our regularly scheduled Board of Supervisors meeting, the next one that we will have down here, and I would suggest that we agendize this item as a timed item for 1 o'clock. Are there any objections to that from the board?
I have no objection.
Okay. Jerry, is that going to require a motion and a... I've never continued a public hearing before, so.
At this point, Madam Chair, how many speakers do we have left that are signed up?
Another 90.
Oh.
No, not 90, I lie. Another 50. 50. Another 50, yeah. And that's just to get through the public hearing portion. We then bring it back for closing comments from everyone. There's just no way to get through this mechanically today. So, Jerry, what action would we need to take on this?
Yeah, I don't think you need a motion on that.
Okay.
Proponent and the groups that are objecting to putting that over?
It truly is up to the pleasure of the board to decide on the continuance,
Okay.
but please.
Then we probably should get a motion if there's going to.
Yeah. Is there any issue, Marcus, with being able to come back here on November 6th? Bobby, are you guys all good with that? Okay, and Rick? Okay, excellent. And let's, on advice of council, we should have a motion on that.
Madam Chair, I make the
Do we
motion
have, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, excuse me, Supervisor Holmes. I just want to clarify that we are certain that we have nothing that will otherwise force us to prematurely conclude on the 6th. We can actually take whatever time is necessary to wrap this up that day.
I'll be here till the cows come home.
Okay, but I just want to make sure we have nothing else scheduled that'll cause us to be kicked over yet.
There is a it's a regular board meeting on that day. There is a PCCP meeting that afternoon, but that can be rescheduled.
We got that covered. Yep.
So I believe we'll have the entire board.
Okay, Madam Chair.
Can you not make a decision, just knowing how much overwhelming response you have and all the people waiting, they can't make a decision?
We actually cannot. So I'm sorry.
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion that we continue the hearing till November the 6th at time certain, 1 p.m.
I'll second that motion with the caveat that I would not be in the area on the 7th, just so everybody knows.
Well, we'll stay here till midnight if we need to.
November 6th is election day. Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
Vote early, vote often.
Yeah, vote early. Vote by mail. All right, let's have a vote on that. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you. At this time, we will adjourn until our next regularly scheduled meeting.